Well, this eerie Lake Huron discovery may be that it possibly contains the remnants of an entire civilization. Whoa, wait, sounds like Atlantis, right? Well, not exactly. But if there really had been an ancient underwater civilization here, it must have been a pretty advanced one. Around 10,000 years ago, two sharp glassy flakes broke off a stone tool and landed on the ground unnoticed. They stayed buried there for thousands of years, until 2013. Then scientists pulled up a small chunk of mud, about the size of a milk carton, from the bottom of Lake Huron, 100 feet underwater. Inside the mud, they found those same two flakes made of obsidian, a shiny black volcanic glass that forms when lava cools quickly. After careful testing, they realized these flakes came from Central Oregon, which is quite a distance, about 2,500 miles away. They found this prehistoric Great Lakes site on the Alpena Amberley Ridge, an underwater landform that once connected what's now Michigan and Ontario. Back then, it was dry land. Early humans used it to build traps for animals like caribou as the Ice Age faded and the Great Lakes began to form. Now, obsidian was the high-tech material of ancient times. It's super sharp and perfect for making tools. If you study the flakes carefully, it's obvious that humans made them. You can see where they struck them and the feathered edges that come from being carefully chipped. That means people were not only crafting tools here, but they also had access to obsidian that came from incredibly far away. It was likely possible through a huge trade network that spanned across the continent. For over 100 years, people have guessed that ancient societies might have existed beneath the Great Lakes, but no one had proof. That's why work on this submerged archaeological site is so important. A team of researchers has been trying to learn more about the 10,000-year-old ruins and the civilization that left them behind for over a decade now. Lake Huron's icy water acted like a time capsule that helped preserve things for thousands of years. So far, researchers have found not only unique stone tools, but also ancient trees with roots still intact and underwater peat bogs that preserved seeds and leaves. It was like an Ice Age version of Pompeii, a scene frozen in time. These discoveries are also helping scientists create new technologies and ways to do underwater archaeology. They've engaged sonars, underwater robots, and divers so far. Now, it's pretty cool that the tools they found on the Alpena Amberley Ridge were way smaller than other tools from the same era found nearby. That might mean a different group of people lived here, and they had their own unique way of life. Even the peat bogs they found, which are about 9,500 years old, hold secrets. They're full of pine needles, seeds, and leaves that could reveal what the environment was like back then. Usually stuff like this breaks down quickly on land, but the cold freshwater preserved it. The Michigan team is working with scientists in Cambridge, England, to extract DNA from the remains. If it works, it could finally confirm what animals lived there, and maybe even more. There are still years of discovery on this prehistoric Great Lakes site ahead. Another famous submerged archaeological site is the lost city of Pavlopetri. Archaeologists think it is the oldest sunken city in the world they've found and made official so far. Pavlopetri is around 5,000 years old. That means it existed even before the legendary Greek heroes in Homer's stories. Scientists first spotted it way back in 1904, and then mostly forgot about it until 1967, when Nicholas Fleming rediscovered it. He described it as a Bronze Age city now lying under about 10 to 13 feet of water. A year later, he returned with a team of scientists to study the ruins. Over 6 weeks, using just hand tapes and a basic grid, they managed to map out the city. They found that it covered almost 1,000 feet by 500 feet and had at least 15 buildings, courtyards, 5 streets, 2 tombs, and around 37 small stone graves. They also found signs that the ruins continued onto the nearby island of Pavlopetri itself. They dug up some amazing pottery, obsidian, and chert blades, and even a tiny bronze figurine that may date all the way back to 2800 BCE. Most of the buildings, though, came from the period between 1650 and 1180 BCE. Then scientists left the site alone again until 2009, when a super team of researchers launched a new 5-year project to really dive deep into the history of Pavlopetri. This time, they had digital mapping tools and better diving equipment, so they could explore and even excavate underwater. They found another 97,000 square feet of buildings, including a large hall and hidden streets. Plus, they dug up even more pottery that showed people had been living in the city from about 3000 BCE to 1100 BCE, and that the city once had a population of 500 to 2,000 people. No one knows for sure how the city ended up underwater, but many scientists think it was because of an earthquake, maybe around 1000 BCE, or even as late as 375 CE. Because it's the oldest underwater city ever found, some people even believe Pavlopetri might have inspired the legend of Atlantis. Another contestant for the Atlantis title lies near Japan. Back in 1986, a local diver was exploring the waters near the Ryukyu Islands when he found a giant structure made of perfectly shaped steps and sharp edges. It was 82 feet underwater. Today, the Yonaguni Monument is one of the most mysterious underwater sites on the planet. The structure is nearly half a football field in size. It looks like a massive stone pyramid with layers of platforms and steps stacked one on top of another. No one really knows where it came from or who built it. Some experts think the monument might be more than 10,000 years old, which would make it older than the Egyptian pyramids. One theory is that it could be the last remains of a lost civilization called Mu, a mythical Pacific society kind of like Atlantis. Others believe an ancient culture that lived in Japan as early as 12,000 BCE might have built it. But many scientists and geologists are skeptical about this possible underwater ancient civilization, even though Yonaguni has narrow passageways, arched openings, and right angles that almost look like city blocks. They say that the site looks a lot like natural rock formations, like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, for example. The whole monument is still connected to a bigger chunk of bedrock, which means it wasn't built piece by piece. And the way the layers of rock are stacked probably has more to do with earthquakes and tectonic movement. It's located in the very active Pacific Ring of Fire. One marine geologist kept going back down there, and every time he found something new. He says he spotted tool marks in the rock, symbols carved into stone faces, and even rock formations shaped like animals. He believes these carvings point to a culture that came from mainland Asia. He said he had identified 10 different structures off Yonaguni, including a ruined castle, a triumphal arch, 5 temples, and even a huge museum. These buildings seem to be connected by roads and channels, and some parts are surrounded by what could be giant stone walls. The explorer believes the city is at least 5,000 years old, based on stalactites found in underwater caves nearby, which would have only formed after the caves flooded. His supporters say they have never seen an earthquake create shapes like this, above or below water. But skeptics blame it all on erosion and insist that whirling underwater currents and sea creatures left holes in the rock. Now, if you want to form your own opinion about it, the spot is open for visitors, and it's definitely a super fun diving experience.
A ship filled with gold and other treasures worth over $13 million was found in the middle of the Namibian desert after almost 500 years. The worker who found it was actually looking for diamonds, but ended up with something way more valuable for history. There were some blocks of copper, some wood, pipes, and elephant tusks. The miners called for an archaeologist, who soon realized it wasn't a disturbed beach like they thought, but a shipwreck. All evidence showed that it was a Portuguese trading vessel, Bom Jesus, that went missing in the 16th century. Experts believe it was a special kind of ship that was bigger, stronger, and better than older ships from Portugal and Spain. These ships were built to take Portuguese explorers on long trips to distant places like India, China, and Japan, and come back with tons of cargo. The Bom Jesus was likely carrying treasures from Lisbon, Portugal to western India. But it looks like on its way around the southern tip of Africa, near Namibia, a big storm pushed the ship too close to the shore. The ship hit a rock, tipped over, and broke apart, sinking into the ocean. Archaeologists found treasure from the captain's chest under the water, which probably fell out when the ship's wooden hull broke. They also found pieces of the ship scattered along the shore, likely from the violent storm and later by construction in the area. The storm must have been very fierce, but they didn't find many bones, which means most of the crew may have survived or were lost at sea. The ship was split into 3 sections and incredibly well preserved, thanks to the thick layers of sand that covered it and prevented rot. Archaeologists who studied the wreck discovered over 40 tons of cargo. There were cannons, swords, blocks of metal like lead and tin, fabrics, and tools that sailors used to navigate the stars while traveling across the ocean. The most exciting discovery was 1,845 copper ingots, weighing as much as 16 to 17 tons altogether. Those copper ingots, or pieces of pure metal, are still in great condition because the hull of the ship and layers of sand protected them from ocean water. The scientists even managed to read the trademarks on them on site and learned they were made by a super wealthy German trading company. There were also more than 2,000 shiny gold and silver coins from different countries, and 105 enormous elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely supposed to become luxury items, like jewelry or carvings at the destination. Archaeologists took some DNA samples from the tusks and found that they came from West African forests and savanna elephants. Researchers were lucky that the ship was found in a restricted diamond mining area. No scavengers were able to get their hands on the treasures. The Bom Jesus remains the oldest and most valuable shipwreck that was ever discovered off the western coast of sub-Saharan Africa. Another shipwreck recently found by accident was buried under a 10-foot tall sand dune near the Caspian Sea. Some people call it the world's largest lake, and it has water levels that rise and fall over time because of the changes in weather patterns. These changes can move sand and uncover things like this shipwreck and other treasures along the coast. As the dune slowly disappeared, the ship started to show. Before digging it out, scientists worried that waves from the sea might damage the wreck. To protect it, they built a wall using thousands of sandbags to keep the waves away. When the ship was uncovered, they discovered it was a 3-masted, 92-foot-long merchant ship with a strong double hull. Wood samples showed the ship was built in the 18th to 19th century using trees like Scots pine, spruce, and larch from the Volga River area or the Caucasus. They even found buckwheat and plants from the same region, which were probably traded or used to feed the sailors. It proves that the ship was part of a group of merchant ships that once sailed the Caspian Sea. An amateur fisherman who was 20 feet under the sea off the coast of Turkey noticed some huge metal remains. He had an underwater camera, so he made footage of the discovery and took it to scientists. They immediately started an investigation and learned that it must be a shipwreck from the first decades of the 20th century. It could be one of the Ottoman Empire ships that had an important mission to deliver supplies, but disappeared without a trace. Scientists got permission to study this Black Sea wreck in detail to learn more about its mysteries. They're hoping to find its shipyard documents to find some answers, as the ship itself is in terrible condition and is tricky to work with. Robot submersibles that belong to an oil and gas company noticed hundreds of intact ancient storage jars sitting on the seabed in the eastern Mediterranean. Experts think those jars are 3,300 years old. This makes the find the oldest shipwreck from the deep sea. The jugs were probably used to store oil or other agricultural products like fruit. This proves that the people who made them organized maritime trade and had incredible navigational skills. It looks like the ancient mariners managed to traverse the Mediterranean Sea without a line of sight to any coast. All they could see was the horizon, so they must have used the sun and other stars to find their way. Off the coast of Sicily, under 20 feet of sand and rock, archaeologists found a shipwreck so old that they aren't even sure what materials were used to build it. They think the ship is from the 5th or 6th century BCE, which means it's over 2,500 years old. This ancient ship wasn't alone. Researchers also found 2 iron anchors shaped like an upside-down T from around the 7th century of the Common Era, and 4 stone anchors from prehistoric times nearby. One of the stone anchors was broken and may have had wooden pieces attached to help it hold on to the seafloor. They figured out that the ship itself was built using the on-shell technique. The wooden planks of the ship were connected so tightly that they could support the ship on their own, with extra beams added just to make it stronger. Sadly, the ship's wooden hull is very fragile now because tiny sea creatures that eat wood have damaged it over the years. Scientists are being extra careful as they study it to make sure it doesn't fall apart. This discovery is such a big deal because it was built during a time when Sicily was super important for trade. Back then, the Greeks and Punics were trying to take control of the seas long before Rome became the ruler of the Mediterranean. By studying this ship, scientists hope to learn more about how people traveled and traded in those ancient times. One more shipwreck, this time off the coast of Kenya. Could be from Vasco da Gama's final voyage. This Portuguese explorer was the first European to reach India by sea around the Cape of Good Hope. Local fishermen discovered the shipwreck in question in 2013. When an underwater archaeologist came to check it out, he found some treasures at the spot: elephant tusks and valuable copper ingots. If this find really has to do with Vasco da Gama, then it must be from the 16th century. It was the year of his 3rd and final voyage to India. Da Gama led a huge fleet of 20 ships, one of which was the São Jorge. Most of the ship is hidden under layers of coral, and a whole team of scientists are carefully digging trenches to find parts of the ship's wooden frame and hull.
In the UK, there are around 115,000 mailboxes, with some of them placed in questionable locations. Look here, we're on a deserted stretch of Caithness Moorhead, and here, just smack dab in the middle of nowhere, between the quarry and some moorland, stands a solitary mailbox. It was local teacher Chris Aitken who stumbled upon this oddity near Worth Hill, close to John O'Groats. Now, John O'Groats is a tiny village 2.5 miles northeast of Canisbay, in the historic county of Caithness, Scotland. The village itself is popular with tourists, but only houses around 300 people on a regular basis, and they have their own mailboxes there. So why would someone need one on a random hill? When Chris shared a photo online, someone chimed in with a theory. A while back, an entrepreneur was selling tiny parcels of land near Campster, claiming buyers became lairds with their little plots. Could this mailbox be related to that? Now, the box, proudly labeled Laird of John O'Groats, features the name Thorsten Sommer and an address in Germany. There's a PIN number on the front, but when Chris opened it, all he found was a website link. The site has pics of Sommer waving a Scottish flag and talking about his love for Scotland, even calling himself the Old Scotsman. Chris tried reaching out through the website for more info, but hasn't heard back. It might be linked to Sommer's reported purchase of a tiny patch of land. But buying Scottish laird titles is often seen as a fraud, giving no real title at all. The area around Worth Hill has had some recent police action too, after a body was found nearby. Ooh, could that somehow be connected to this mysterious mailbox too? Well, enough of the detective stories. Let's dive into some high-end fashion, shall we? So, you might have come across that funky image popping up all over the internet, claiming there's a pop-up Prada store in the Texas desert. Well, it's kind of true and kind of not. Yes, there's a shop, sort of. It showcased a whole range of Prada gear worth around $80,000. And guess what? Miuccia Prada herself handpicked the items. But still, you couldn't buy a single thing there. No cashiers, no shop assistants. It was like the place was permanently closed. The twist? It's actually an art installation, made entirely of biodegradable materials It was designed to gradually blend back into nature, taking a fun jab at our current consumer culture. But why display goods you can't actually buy? Well, it's a metaphor for the elusive charm of luxury. While it was meant to decay in peace, the hype surrounding it led to a surprising amount of foot traffic and even some chaos. After trying to fend off a few would-be thieves, the artist had to admit defeat. Now it's a hotspot for photos, drawing everyone from tourists to celebrities. Right, you can find a brand purse in the desert, but can you, let's say, find a car somewhere in Welsh caves? Well, the answer is yes, and let me tell you, it's not just one car, but many of them. The Cavern of Lost Souls is a well-known abandoned car cave tucked away in Wales. Once upon a time, it was a slate mine in Ceredigion, where workers pulled out tons of slate and transported it using narrow-gauge horse-drawn tramways. But as the mining industry faded away decades ago, the mine fell into a hush. If you dare go inside, which I personally do not recommend, you'll find two large chambers, but one is particularly noteworthy. The main chamber plunges around 65 feet deep and is mostly underwater, with just a small opening above. Since the mine shut down, locals and the council have taken advantage of that opening, tossing in all sorts of unwanted stuff. You'll find everything from fridges and TVs to even whole cars piled up in one corner. What makes the Cavern of Lost Souls special is the single beam of light that breaks through, casting its glow on the twisted heap of wrecked cars and metal. The water, when hit by that light, glows a stunning turquoise green, creating beautiful reflections of the cars and cavern walls on the still surface. Every now and then, a fragment of slate falls, shattering the quiet and sending ripples across the water. There was yet another weird find in Wales. A shiny 10-foot silver monolith recently popped up on Hay Bluff in Powys, Wales, and is sparking a ton of curiosity. A local builder, Craig Muir, discovered it during his hike, and he described it as looking like it just dropped down from space. It's made of surgical steel, has no markings, and is super well crafted without visible welds. Muir's find is reminiscent of those mysterious monoliths that popped up worldwide in 2020, creating quite a buzz online. Local Richard Haynes suggested it could be some kind of scientific installation. But with national park rules against unauthorized structures, it might not be there for long. With no visible tracks around it, Muir speculated it could have been brought in by a group or even dropped from a helicopter. Now, this isn't the first strange monolith sighting. Similar ones have been spotted in Utah, the Isle of Wight, and even Glastonbury Tor, where one was humorously marked "Not Banksy." However, it could be easily him. The UK is the leading country in terms of the number of Banksy's pieces of art. As of 2023, there were 70 of them. No wonder, as he is reportedly British and was born in Bristol. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile, the driest non-polar desert on Earth, features a bizarre sight at kilometer mark 1309 on the Pan American Highway, a giant cement hand that towers 36 feet above the sand. Looks creepy, right? Well, worry not. It's not some creepy monster trying to grip you and take you to the netherworld. It's not an ancient relic from a lost civilization either. A professional sculptor created this quirky landmark back in 1992. Despite its remoteness, the hand is frequently targeted by graffiti, so local volunteers must clean it up twice a year. And by the way, it's not the only landmark of this kind. The very same sculptor also created a similar hand in Punta del Este, Uruguay, called Man Emerging to Life, and it represents the idea that a giant might be holding South America in a stone grip. Hey, works for me. Now check out this giant stone sphere hidden in the forest of Bosnia's Visoko Valley. What do you think? Is it an ancient relic or a modern art installation? Share your thoughts in the comments. But to be completely frank with you, which I always am, nobody really knows for sure. Experts think this sphere, which measures around 10 feet across, is just a naturally occurring rock formation called a concretion. These iron-rich balls get their reddish color from the high iron content and form when mineral particles stick together over time. While concretions can take on some pretty wild shapes, the exact process of how they form is still a bit of a mystery. Then there's this archaeologist, often called the Bosnian Indiana Jones, who claims it's actually a man-made artifact from over 1,000 years ago. Spherical concretions aren't unique to Bosnia, though. You can find them all over the world, like these boulders in New Zealand, massive round stones that are over 60 million years old. There are also cannonball concretions in North Dakota. And let's not forget about the man-made stone spheres crafted by the Diquis people in Costa Rica, which are perfectly shaped and arranged, definitely a testament to human creativity. So while the Bosnian sphere is super intriguing, it's probably just an ancient concretion and not a remnant of a lost civilization. Bummer. Finally, some things are so well hidden that you have to go deep down into the seafloor to get a glimpse of them. Once a hedonistic hotspot for the Roman elite, Baiae was like the Las Vegas of its time, but now its ruins are submerged underwater. This resort city thrived on volcanic hot springs and attracted the likes of Nero and Caesar, who even built vacation villas there. However, in the 8th century, Baiae lost a battle and was abandoned by 1500. As the water levels rose, much of the city was lost beneath the bay. Today, you can explore Baiae's ancient ruins in one of the few underwater archaeological parks in the world. Hold your breath.
What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists have been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abydos, Ubaidos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abydos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abydos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abydos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies in coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abydos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon. This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous Pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abydos, but Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Girza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
In July 1990, 4 Czech guys decided to go on an adventure to find the Mongolian death worm, a creature that might have inspired the monster you've seen in the movie Doom. They say it lives somewhere deep in the Gobi Desert. So they flew to Mongolia, hopped into an ATV, and hired some local guides to help them. All that to meet a creature that is up to 6 feet long, can spit acid that could melt anything, and is capable of shooting electricity at those it doesn't like. Legend says that these friendly guys spend most of their days hiding underneath the sandy dunes, but they like to come out during the wetter months of June and July. So the timing for a spotting was simply perfect. But the crew needed to figure out how to lure the creature. Sadly for them, no one knew what the giant worm liked to eat. So they built a thumper, which is a machine that made rhythmic pounding noises. They were hoping it would call the worm out of the ground. For 2 months, they searched the vast desert, crossing dunes and rocky plains, looking for any sign of the creature. But alas, it didn't really work out. Ivan McCurley, who was the leader of the 1990 expedition, came back to Gobi Desert again. He once tried to attract the megaworm with blasts, and the second time he used a small airplane to scout the dunes. Over the years, groups from America, Britain, and New Zealand organized big expeditions to the Gobi Desert to try and find the creature. Many others came from all around the world on their own and found nothing. The people in the West first found out about the megaworm of the Gobi Desert thanks to an American paleontologist, Roy Chapman Andrews. This brave man was probably the inspiration for Indiana Jones. In 1926, he wrote about the creature in his book. At a meeting with Mongolian leaders, Andrews heard detailed descriptions of the creature, even though none of them had ever seen it themselves. One of them described it as looking like a sausage, about 2 feet long, with no head or legs. According to him, the worm was so venomous that just touching it could instantly take your life, and it lived in the loneliest parts of the Gobi Desert. Andrews didn't think the creature was real, but he shared these stories again in another book. In May 2005, 4 friends from Great Britain who search for monsters professionally decided to try their luck. They made drawings of the worm and hired local people to hand out flyers all over the Gobi Desert. These flyers offered a reward to anyone who could give information about the worm or even bring them a specimen. They thought loud sounds that other explorers tried would scare the beast away. Some told them it likes damp conditions, so they came up with a plan to block streams of water to create wet areas that would lure the worm out. Their plan didn't work because it was too hard to build dams in the desert. They ended up using small traps, but didn't find any actual proof that the worm existed. But they did meet locals who shared interesting stories about strange creatures they had seen over 70 years. Over the years, stories of the monster spread around the world. In some of them, it's only 1 foot long. In others, it's as large as a human. It's white-gray or scaly and brown, or maybe fleshy and bright red. Someone said it resembled a snake, or maybe a caterpillar, or maybe it has wings and can fly. And some believe it could be a supernatural evil being without a body. Maybe the stories are so different, and the search operations are so fruitless, because the creature doesn't even exist. Or it could be one of many cryptids. Those creatures like Bigfoot, Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, their existence has yet to be proven. In 1983, one scientist who was visiting the region heard that an old man had managed to catch the mysterious worm. He also learned there was a nest nearby. The scientist bravely approached the hole in the sand and put his hand inside. A giant creature dragged him in, and he was never seen again. Just kidding. He actually found a Tartar sand boa inside. It's a chunky, burrowing, non-venomous snake that has small eyes and gray-brown scales. He showed it to the locals to verify if it was the monster, and supposedly all of them said yes. Most Mongolians who know about the worm still believe it's real. Now, even though people call our supposed monster a worm, it's just what it sounds like in the English translation. Many Mongol cultures have used this word for centuries to refer to any animals they thought to be really dangerous, especially snakes, even non-venomous ones. So, it doesn't have to be a literal worm after all. Worms are soft and squishy, but a creature living in the harsh Gobi Desert would need to be tougher, more like a snake or a type of lizard without legs. Neither of these creatures can shoot electricity or spit acid like they say the death worm does. But some snakes, like cobras, can spit venom that's dangerous for people. If it were real, the creature would have a backbone, and explorers searching for it would likely find some bones or evidence left behind. And there are actually fossil remains all over the Gobi Desert. Scientists found representatives of over 80 dino groups here over the last almost 100 years. It all started with the world's first dinosaur egg nests. This discovery changed all the scientists knew about dinos. It was the first proof they laid eggs. In the following 2 years, the same expedition team unearthed over 100 dinosaurs and took them to the American Museum of Natural History, where you can still see them today. Some of them were swimming around in the Cretaceous Sea that used to be here about 71 million years ago. They resembled modern birds. The mystery of the megaworm is still unsolved, but there used to be another mystery scientists finally managed to explain. Back in the 13th century, a famous traveler, Marco Polo, not the guy from the swimming pool game, crossed the Gobi Desert. He thought he could hear mysterious noises, like the sounds of musical instruments such as drums. He wrote about it in his book and believed he might be hearing the voices of restless spirits. Scientists call these noises singing sands or booming sands. Unlike the squeaky sound you might hear when walking on a sandy beach, these desert sounds are much louder, like a musical instrument playing deep, haunting notes. Over the years, people came up with all kinds of ideas about what caused the sounds, like underground water or winds making the sand vibrate. Not all dunes can do this, and scientists wanted to figure out why. Sometimes the winds might cause a small avalanche on the side of a dune, and then you can hear the magical sound start. But this is rare. So, to study it, scientists had to help the dunes sing. They climbed to the top of a dune and slid down on their backs, using their hands and feet to push sand down. As the sand tumbled, the sound started softly and got louder. They could even feel the vibrations with their hands. So they found out that for a dune to sing, a few special things need to happen. The grains of sand must be the right shape. The dune has to be big, and the sand must be very dry, so no singing after it rains. Inside the dune, there's a hard layer of packed sand that acts like a giant speaker. This layer bounces the sound waves back and forth, makes the noise louder and louder, and creates a haunting melody that can fill the desert air. In other words, the dunes can play tunes. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't help myself with that one.
Mirror check. You've got your beige parka on, your chisel is packed, and your overnight plane ride to Saudi Arabia is booked. You know what this means, right? Unfortunately, you weren't cast in the remake of Dune. It just means that you're ready to go explore the world's largest desert areas in the hopes of uncovering prehistoric secrets about our ancestors. Let's get one thing straight. If you ever thought that deserts were empty spaces, think again. They might be filled with sand as far as the eye can see, but they also hold a lot of history. You know, because before humans settled down in cities and towns, we were nomadic people, and we traveled all around the globe looking for food, water, and shelter. So we had to come up with some interesting stuff to survive. Like this thing that was found in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Do you have any idea what this could have been? Over many years, scientists have discussed the origins and use of huge structures such as these ones. It seems our Neolithic ancestors were way smarter than we gave them credit for. They didn't spend all their hours around the fire carving weapons out of stone. No, they were also practicing their architectural skills. These huge stone structures are called desert kites, because if you look at them from a distance, well, they sort of look like kites. Archaeologists have arrived at the consensus that these kites were used to lure animals in. This way, it would make it easier for our ancestors to guarantee their week's food. But that's not all. Take a look at these monolithic structures right here. They show us that our ancestors probably drew on rocks, the blueprint of what they were going to build on the ground. Just like modern-day architects, desert kites could be miles long, so they drew out a plan before actually building them. The most surprising feature of all is that these kites were built even before things such as Stonehenge. We're talking around 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. Over the last decade, scientists have been able to identify over 6,000 desert kites spread across the Middle East and West and Central Asia. If you don't think this huge, try building something this large, without the help of any drones. It looks like a pretty difficult feat to me. And apparently, Saudi Arabia's desert is filled with more amazing things. Scientists have found mysterious stone structures that are older than the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. So of course, you can't wait to go check that out. Can we all agree that carrying around heavy rocks to build a pyramid without the help of modern technology sounds absurd? I mean, how on earth did they do it? Now imagine turning back the clock about 2,000 years into the past and finding humans that built similar gigantic structures in isolated areas. Take a look at these so-called Mustadals. They are rectangular structures built from piled-up stones, found over 77,000 square miles. Some archaeologists believe that these monuments were used for ritualistic purposes, maybe processions of some kind, where people would walk from one end of the plateau to the other. I'd be down for that. Now let's move on to another deserted area. We're entering the world-famous Sahara Desert landscape. Isn't it beautiful? Here, you're about to unravel an ancient mystery, something that took years for researchers to solve. Fun fact, the Sahara Desert is the world's largest hot desert. It spans over 3 million square miles, which would be like putting 1,000 times the country of Hawaii next to each other. We say it's the largest hot desert because the world's largest desert area is Antarctica. But we all know temperatures over there are freezing, not the typical image of when we think of a desert. Deep into the desert, near the Algerian town of Fougeret et Zoua, something strange was found. For decades, these tiny dots appeared on images of Google Earth, but nobody could explain what they were. Some scientists were sure that these circles are the result of oil activity in the region. Others guessed that these were ancient fogeras or ancient water wells. There are dozens of them, stretching for miles and miles in a straight line. The strange thing is that they are always far away from any town, road, or human activity in general. So what was or is their purpose? If you had to take a guess, what would you say? Remember we talked about how our ancestors had to be creative in order to survive in the desert? Let's try to walk in their shoes for a minute. Imagine you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer living in a desert area. You spend your days basking in the hot sun, trying to count all the grains of sand around you. But you also need to eat and drink water. But how on earth do you get water in a desert? Sure, you can hope to keep running into oasis every week or so, but that seems a bit risky, doesn't it? That's why North African people invented the so-called fogeras. The fogeras are a 2,500-year-old irrigation system. Locals would dig deep wells in elevated areas, wells deep enough to tap into underground water. Then, they would dig parallel shafts at regular distances. This way, the water would flow from the main well down into all the shafts and irrigate entire areas. Travelers could stop by the shafts and quench their thirst. They could also raise livestock and tend to crops. Pretty clever, huh? As much as these holes did look like fogaras, a little bit of research would show you that they're not. You see, these shafts were built in a line, and not in a circular shape like the ones we're looking at now. So maybe it has something to do with the second option? Maybe these desert holes were related to oil activity in the region? Let's have a look at the holes up close and personal. From Google Earth, they don't seem that big, but in real life, they are huge craters. The tip to uncovering what they are is hidden beneath the sand. If you were one of the researchers originally uncovering the truth behind this mystery, you would have found something unique hidden in the sand. Old dynamites and vintage sardine cans. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together, scientists found that these sardine cans were a model from the 1950s and 1960s. It seems that entire teams from that decade would camp out while they surveyed the area for oil. And what about the dynamites? These were used for seismic surveying. This is an old technique, used to identify if there is oil and gas beneath the Earth's surface. Still in North Africa, you find out about another desert mystery worth exploring. Near the city of Meteorite, southwest of Algeria's capital, one runs into 13 peculiar monuments. These structures are also called Jedars, and yes, I am aware of how much that may sound like a Star Wars reference. They are pyramid-like in their shapes, and as far as scientists know, they were used as final resting places for the people who lived in the region. Can you guess who these were? Most likely the Berber nomads. And since we're talking about ancient stuff, they were probably built between the 4th and 7th centuries CE. Once scientists began to explore the insides of these monuments, they found they were pretty big inside. They found large underground vaults, chambers, and labyrinth-like corridors that gave way to over 20 compartments. It could take you up to 2 hours to walk around in them, and apparently our ancestors also used its walls to depict images of animals and hunting scenes. There's no definite proof of what these Jedars were used for, though. This is so neat, huh? I'm sure that our world's desert is filled with many more mysterious things for us to unravel. I guess I'll see you next time so that we can continue our explorations.
Something exciting and kinda unexpected popped out among the rocks of the Ica Valley in Peru. The bones of a really old whale that lived almost 40 million years ago. At first, no one was really impressed because the bones they found were big and weirdly shaped, so people just thought they were looking at giant boulders. I mean, that's cool too, but things got way better when they realized those were the remains of a very large ancient animal that roamed along the coast of ancient Peru. Plus, it was probably the heaviest creature that ever lived. Sorry, blue whale, I know you worked hard to get to the top. The length of over 100 feet and weight of more than 200 tons brought you the status of the biggest animal on our planet. But it seems you've held the title long enough. Time to hand it over to our next candidate, and that one's really gigantic. This ocean beast was probably shorter than the blue whale, but heavier, with a weight that could be between 93 tons and 370 tons. If it's closer to the higher number, it'll make Perseus the biggest animal ever known to have lived on Earth. And it seems its weight was the result of having extremely thick, dense bones. You can see such bones today in manatees or some other early whales. Dense bones are a great tool for such marine mammals. This feature makes them heavy and allows them to stay submerged most of the time. But at the same time, if their body was too heavy, they would end up sinking all the time, and they would waste too much energy to move back up to the surface. So, to avoid sinking, marine mammals need to have enough lighter tissues, like muscles and fat, to help them float in the water without using too much energy. Now, scientists didn't have the whole skeleton, which makes it hard to tell how big the animal was. But they used the ratio of the heavy bones to the lighter tissues in other marine mammals to estimate the overall weight of this giant ancient whale. Experts found these fossils about 13 years ago and spent the next decade freeing the whale from the rock. Its anatomy and age showed this whale was a cousin of Basilosaurus, a whale that had a long snout full of sharp teeth, and a sleek body similar to that of an eel. Even if Perseus wasn't bigger than the blue whale, it was still a giant that ruled the ocean depths. Unlike modern whales, there's a possibility that this ancient fellow was a predator that liked to go after bigger prey. And this also changes how we see the history of whales. Scientists used to think these magnificent creatures became really big about 5 million years ago when they started eating lots of small creatures. But here's the proof that giant whales existed even before that. But it's still unclear how this whale managed to find enough food to sustain its enormous body. Plus, it's still hard to tell what exactly this ancient creature had on its menu. It was pretty large and not such a fast swimmer, so it's possible it searched for food in shallow waters. Then it probably ate crustaceans, clams, or some other small animals hiding in the sand. One theory says it was a scavenger, which basically means it munched on remains of everything that would come its way. It's not so unusual to find marine animals in deserts. Many of these regions used to be covered with water anyway. The Sahara in Africa is a perfect example. About 50 to 100 million years ago, this was not a dry desert, but a shallow saltwater body called the Trans-Saharan seaway. The land is not wet there anymore, of course, but people who lived in that area knew about it because they used to find old shells across the desert. The sea was about 164 feet deep. That sounds enough for a nice swim. Some would say this area looked like modern Puerto Rico, with lots of sun and shallow water. Mangrove forests were a common thing as well as seafloors covered with mollusks, like snails and clams. The marine sediment that was left behind after the sea had dried up is full of different fossils. And the animal that lived in that ancient underwater world didn't look friendly. Plus, they were much bigger than their relatives from modern times, so a regular-sized human would end up as a snack, not even a whole meal. Normally, when animals live on small islands, they can become much bigger than their relatives from the mainland. This is something we call island gigantism, and it happens because there are more resources or fewer predators on islands. Maybe the same thing happened in the Trans-Saharan seaway. Even though it wasn't an actual island, the water moved in and out, which created little pockets of water. And specific conditions in these pockets might have helped animals grow bigger. So we're talking about giant sea snakes, catfish, and fish that no longer exist today. One had incredibly strong jaws, and the animal used them to eat hard things and even crush shells. Their teeth showed they were fierce predators other animals had every reason to be afraid of. They went through some changes when it came to diet, similar to some types of piranhas. And the competition to get to the top of the food chain wasn't a joke. Not when there were also such large predators as sharks, crocodiles, and ancient relatives of elephants. Sahara went through different phases. If you could use a time machine and take a peek at Earth's largest hot desert as it was about 6,000 years ago, you wouldn't have to struggle with sand and heat. You'd have a nice walk through a green and pretty lush place. In the past, people who lived in that area didn't leave drawings on cave walls that showed camels, sand dunes, and scorpions. All those things you'd see in today's Sahara. Instead, they drew crocodiles. That's additional evidence that the Sahara used to have a lot of water and plants enough to support these big yet scary animals. Around 3 billion years ago, Earth might have been mostly covered with water. Today, it's about 71% of its surface, but it seems that our planet used to be a giant ocean world with no continents at all, just some scattered islands. Scientists studied special rocks in Western Australia that formed in a place deep under the ocean called a hydrothermal vent system. To explain this better, it's important to mention two common oxygen types, O16 and O18. O18 is heavier because it has extra neutrons. O16 evaporates from water more easily, and as researchers studied an old ocean floor, they found a lot of O18, more than in today's oceans. This way, they realized ancient Earth had less dry land than Earth today. Australia is a good spot to conduct these studies because a long time ago, it also used to be a beautiful place with large animals and lush rainforests. But as time went by, the land became drier and Australia had more deserts formed, such as the Great Victoria Desert. Rainforest remained only on the edges of the continent. What happens with deserts across the globe is called desertification. That's when land that used to be good for growing things turns into a desert or something similar. Our planet changes over time, together with its climate. But desertification also happens because of human activities, like mining, farming, and building cities. And when land turns into a desert, it's a problem because it can't support people and animals anymore. Food doesn't grow there. There's not enough clean water, and animals lose their homes. To help with this problem, there's a plan many countries agreed to. They decided to work with farmers to take care of the land, fix damaged areas, and manage water better. All in all, to make our planet a better place for life. We all grew up believing that Stonehenge is the world's most ancient observatory, but now it has some serious competition for the title. Nabta Playa was built more than 2,000 miles away in southern Egypt and thousands of years before Stonehenge and even the pyramids of Giza. In 1973, a Bedouin guide stumbled upon a strange group of huge stone formations while crossing the Sahara Desert. He led American archaeologist Fred Wendorf to the site, located about 60 miles from the Nile. Wendorf's friend and colleague claims the team found the stones while stopping for a bathroom break in the desert. Either way, what they found changed history. At first, Wendorf thought the stone structures were just natural formations, but then it hit him. This area was once a lake, meaning no natural rocks should even be there. He kept coming back to the site for decades, and by the early 1990s, his team finally uncovered a circle of stones that seemed to line up with the stars in a way no one could explain. After 7 long years of trying to crack the mystery of the site, Wendorf reached out to an expert in archaeoastronomy. They study how ancient people used the stars. One evening, while the expert sat in the cool desert sand staring at the stones, he realized that they formed a pattern radiating outward from a massive burial mound. One by one, as they dug into the sediment, the buried megaliths started lining up like spokes on a wheel. The team had already used radiocarbon dating to test samples from fire hearths and tamarisk wood roofing found inside the stone circle. Nabta Playa had dozens of standing stones, all a few feet tall. Some of them lined up exactly with the sunrise on special days, and others matched up with bright stars in the sky. Inside the big circle, there were 6 special stones that may have been used for rituals or marking important times of the year. Around them, 29 standing stones might have worked like a simple calendar to help people know when it was time for something important, like the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. When the sun rose in just the right spot, it was a sign that the rainy season was coming. The stone circle once aligned with the brightest stars in the northern sky: Arcturus, Sirius, and Alpha Centauri. Some stones even pointed to the constellation Orion. By tracing Arcturus's movement across the sky, they figured out that it matched perfectly with the circle around 4800 BCE. That means it was the oldest astronomical site ever discovered. And the people of Nabta Playa may have been watching the stars thousands of years before telescopes were even invented. It looks like it had a huge meaning for people living and traveling through the desert. Over 10,000 years ago, the long, cold, and dry ice age that lasted for tens of thousands of years was finally fading away. Northern Africa got massive monsoons and rains that filled up seasonal lakes. So, parts of the desert turned into short-lived oases. For the nomadic people who roamed this harsh land, these summer rains were everything. Their entire way of life revolved around cattle. When archaeologists opened the central tomb at Nabta Playa, they dug up cattle bones and even a massive rock carved into the shape of a cow. The people who built it used the stars to guide them and find hidden watering holes like Nabta Playa, which likely held water for about 4 months a year, starting with the summer monsoons. But there was no North Star back then, so instead they navigated using bright stars and the way the sky seemed to spin in circles above them. When the lakes were full, the standing stones would be partly submerged, and from the western shore, you would see the reflection of the stars on the dark water. Nabta Playa is way less famous than Stonehenge, perhaps because its stones were buried and the famous site in England was open to visitors for thousands of years. Sadly, when Nabta Playa did become famous, some tourists ruined parts of it by moving stones around, which messed up the ancient star alignments. To protect it, the authorities moved everything to a museum where people can see the stones and the carved cow statue without damaging them. The Egyptian Observatory isn't the only construction similar to Stonehenge. It has versions that were used for different purposes from Germany and France to the US and the Andes in northern Peru. This last one is actually one of the oldest big structures ever built in this region. The circular plaza is made of 2 giant stone walls arranged in a ring. It was likely used for ceremonies and gatherings. Scientists have carbon dated it to be about 4,750 years old, which means it was built before the Great Pyramids of Egypt and Stonehenge. The plaza had 2 entrances and a special layer of clay, soil, gravel, and charcoal underneath. It was carefully planned and built. Archaeologists also found ceramic pieces, quartz crystals, and gemstones at the site, so it was definitely a special place. People visited it for centuries, but at some point it was sealed off, probably because of changing beliefs and traditions. The most recent discovery was the remains of a large timber circle roughly the same age and with parallels to Stonehenge, all the way up in Denmark. This open-air structure was likely part of a special area where prehistoric people from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age gathered for rituals and ceremonies. The circle was made up of 45 giant wooden posts, forming a huge ring about 100 feet wide. The wood is gone now, but scientists believe tall timbers once stood in the holes and created an impressive wood henge. No one knows exactly what these circles were used for, but archaeologists have found animal bones and food remains at similar sites. So people probably used to gather there for feasts and rituals. In 2024, scientists found 2 ancient stone circles from the Neolithic period in Dartmoor National Park in England. Some archaeologists believe they might form a sacred ark. Many of Dartmoor's stone structures were built in a curved shape on the high ground in the center of the area. A long time ago, Dartmoor was covered in forests, so people may have used the high ground as important markers. One of the newly found circles fits inside this ark, but the other one is outside of it, to the north. This could have been an entrance point into the ark. There's also a raised bank of earth near the stones, which looks similar to other famous Neolithic sites, like the Ring of Brodgar in Scotland and Stonehenge itself. This means the people who built these circles may have visited Stonehenge or been inspired by it. Archaeologists in Oman found ancient stone monuments called tralith, which got the nickname Arabian Stonehenge. They were finished about 2,000 years ago, but no one knows for sure who built them or why. Scientists also found stone hand axes that are incredibly old, between 300,000 and 1.3 million years old, from the time when the first humans left Africa. At another site in central Oman, archaeologists discovered a Neolithic tomb from around 5000 to 4600 BCE. There are 2 chambers with the bones of dozens of people inside beneath a giant megalithic structure. Nearby, they also discovered rock carvings that were made by people who lived in the area. And then there is another Stonehenge look-alike, this time in Saudi Arabia, that was used as an apartment complex thousands of years ago. Archaeologists discovered a total of 345 stone circles by looking at aerial photos of a lava field. Each circle is between 13 to 26 feet and has at least one large standing stone in the middle. These structures still have remains of stone walls and doorways. Stone circles like Stonehenge are often linked to ceremonies and rituals, but scientists say that many early houses were actually built in round shapes, and rectangular homes only became common much later in history. This is a real human brain. Well, it was, until a hot cloud of ash turned it into glass. This crazy transformation happened almost 2,000 years ago, when Mount Vesuvius decided it was a good day to erupt and destroy cities like Pompeii, Oplontis, and Herculaneum. This particular brain belonged to a young man who lived in 79 CE in Herculaneum. Not the most famous Roman town, but it was the first place that was discovered under Vesuvius's ashes way back in 1709. Around 200 years later, archaeologists found the remains of this young man lying face down on a bed. All the smoke and ash probably made him disoriented, so while most of the citizens of Herculaneum rushed to the shore, hoping to be rescued, the brain guy ended up trapped inside a building and passed out. Weirdly enough, this saved his brain from completely disappearing. How in the world does a brain turn into glass? Well, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, it didn't expel just lava. It also sent away a really hot cloud of ash before the solidified lava could flow down. This type of lava, known as pyroclastic flow, could get as hot as 869 degrees Fahrenheit. An insane temperature, we know. Hot enough to melt your brain, but not hot enough to turn it into glass. The cloud of ash, however, can reach temperatures between 932 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,112 degrees Fahrenheit. But to turn something into glass, you don't just need heat, you need rapid cooling too. To put it simply, you have to heat something to a very high temperature until it melts into a liquid. If you let it cool down slowly, the molecules of this liquid will start to calmly organize themselves in the shape of crystals. But if this something cools down super fast, it will solidify in whatever shape the liquid was. It's like making ice cubes. If you pour water into a tray and stick it in the freezer, it will turn into ice because it cools down quickly. But if you leave the water out at room temperature, it'll just evaporate. This means that the brain melted due to a really high temperature, but before it could crystallize, for example, or just boil away, it got really cold. The flow from the eruption was not hot enough for this to happen, but the cloud of ash that reached town before the pyroclastic flow was hot enough to start this process, and fast enough to leave just at the right time. To figure out the exact temperature needed for this brain-to-glass transformation, scientists used a technique called differential scanning calorimetry. This fancy name basically means that they heat up glass shards to see when they start to change shape. They discovered that the cloud of ash had to be exactly 950 degrees Fahrenheit hot for the brain cells to start melting. Now, remember how I said this guy was inside a building, but most of the citizens were outside? Well, those people were also exposed to this drastic change in temperature, but they didn't turn into glass because they were not being protected by the walls of a building. The protection provided by the skull surely helped our guy, but it was not enough. And since other people didn't have the same protection, their brains basically poofed. And before you ask, no other parts of his body turned into glass. You see, you need some liquid for the glass-making process to happen. The brain has a lot of water and fat, which makes it a prime candidate for the glassification process. Yes, I've just made that word up. Other organs might have contained liquid, but they weren't as protected as the brain, so they were destroyed by the heat. And bones? Well, bones don't have enough liquid, so they just remained the same. The ones that didn't char, anyway. When the brain turned into glass, it looked a lot like an obsidian stone, a type of volcanic glass formed by the cool lava of a volcano. Even the forensic archaeologist who discovered this glassified brain thought it was just a stone at first. He was studying the bones of our hero when he noticed something shining inside of his skull, right in the middle of all the volcanic ash that filled it. To his surprise, this thing was way more fragile than obsidian and smaller too, with some fragments being only a few millimeters large. He only figured this was part of that guy's brain after he took the glass to the lab. With the help of a microscope, he discovered that this was not a stone but an organic tissue, which is basically cells that form our organs. This organic tissue was made by protein, a molecule produced by living things like animals and plants. And this was not just any protein. This one was specific to the human brain because every organ is made of different types of protein. The researchers also found nerve cells preserved inside this glass, complete with the tendrils that help them receive and send messages. The microscope also showed what was left of myelin, a fatty substance that gives a speed boost to the messages traveling along the nerves. This isn't the first time scientists discovered preserved human brains. In fact, more than 4,000 brains have been found since the 17th century. It may not look like a big number, but keep in mind that finding only the brain preserved in a skeleton while the other organs are gone is not that common. You see, the human brain is actually the first thing that decomposes when we're 6 feet under, and it usually turns into liquid. When scientists stumble upon a human brain, it's usually dried, frozen, or literally turned into soap. A brain can be dehydrated if a person perishes in a place that is very hot, like a desert. Frozen brains are found, obviously, in places that are super cold, like polar tundras. A brain turned into soap may sound weird, but the saponification process is not that rare. You need a lot of fat and oils to make soap, and the human brain is filled with this. It's a complex process, but if you find a brain that turned into soap, it must have been buried in a place that is very wet and has little oxygen. Back in 1982, for example, construction workers found dozens of human skeletons in a pond in Florida. They were all 8,000 years old, and 91 of them actually had their brains still somewhat intact. And by intact, I mean they turned into jelly soap. During the 2000s, the brains of 45 people were found in Spain, preserved because of this saponification process. This discovery helped researchers understand the chemical composition of the brains and even the weather conditions of the moment when these people passed away. Scientists also discovered two 3,700-year-old brains in Turkey that belonged to a middle-aged man and a teenager that were trying to escape an attack on their city. This time, the brains turned into charcoal because of a super hot fire. And even though their skulls preserved the brains in this state, the heating and cooling process was probably not intense enough to glassify them. But this? It's the first time in history that scientists have found a brain that naturally turned into glass. It's like finding a unicorn, but in a more scientific way. So what does this discovery mean? Well, for starters, it gives us a glimpse into the lives of those who existed such a long time ago. Secondly, it taught scientists an amazing way to preserve the human brain. It also shows just how powerful nature can be. Powerful enough to turn a brain into glass, but delicate enough to preserve it for thousands of years. So, let's give a shout out to the young man who unknowingly contributed to science. He probably had no idea that his brain would one day be the star of a groundbreaking discovery. His tragic end has given us a fascinating peek into the past.
Stonehenge is famous, but it isn't the oldest UK monument of its kind in England. That title belongs to Flagstones, a site that predates Stonehenge by about 200 years. In fact, it's possible that whoever built Stonehenge might have been copycats, or perhaps, as some prefer, inspired by flagstones. Let's start unraveling the mystery of flagstones by looking at its exact age. To crack this ancient puzzle, scientists turned to a powerful technique: radiocarbon dating prehistoric monuments. This method works on organic materials like wood, bone, or charcoal that are up to about 60,000 years old. Each of these materials contains something called carbon-14. When an organism passes away, its carbon-14 starts to break down at a predictable rate. By measuring how much is left, scientists can estimate the age of these ancient objects. The method is really impressive, so it doesn't come as a surprise that the inventor of this method was awarded the Nobel Prize. Radiocarbon dating has revealed that people built flagstones around 3,200 BCE, making it older than even the earliest parts of Stonehenge. But the mystery of flagstones is just beginning to unfold. Flagstones is located in Dorset, in southwest England, about 37 miles away from Stonehenge. It was discovered in the 1980s when workers were building a new road. Archaeologists dug up a huge circular ditch about 330 feet wide, made with overlapping pits. Inside the pits, they found the remains of at least 7 people, a cremated adult, 3 young individuals, and 3 other adults whose bodies were partly cremated. This shows that people could have used the site as an ancient cremation burial site. Flagstones is basically a big, ancient circle that popped up right where early farming communities were spending their time. If you went there today, you wouldn't see any obvious walls or banks, but if you look inside the pits that make up the circle, you'll find chalk rubble from both sides. That's a clue that when people dug these pits, they used the dirt and chalk they took out to build up banks both inside and outside the circle. This special spot sits right in the middle of a whole bunch of other really old monuments and sites, which were built over thousands of years during the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. Experts have figured out the ages of some of these nearby places really well. For example, the ditch at Maiden Castle dates back to around 3,600 BCE, and the Big Henge at Mount Pleasant was built around 2,600 BCE. Today, half of Flagstones is under that road, and the other half is under an old historic house looked after by the National Trust. You can find objects from the site at the Dorset Museum. Because flagstones and early Stonehenge look so similar, with round enclosures, pits, and cremated burials, scientists used to think they appeared at the same time. But thanks to radiocarbon dating, we now know flagstones, this ancient cremation burial site, is the earliest big circular monument ever found in Britain. To figure out how old the site really is, researchers tested things like human bones, red deer antlers, and charcoal found there. One of the most puzzling discoveries was a young man who was buried under a huge sarsen stone in the middle of the circle. Someone left him there about 1,000 years after people used the site for the first time. This find just added to the mystery of flagstones. You're probably wondering about the flagstones versus Stonehenge comparison. Well, the latter is a mystery on its own, a big old circle of giant stones in the south of England. Those who made it didn't write anything down, so we don't know exactly what they were thinking. One old tale says that King Arthur's wizard, Merlin, used magic to move the stones from Ireland, where giants had put them together. Another story says that people from Denmark built it. Today, some people think extraterrestrial visitors made it. A man named John Aubrey started studying Stonehenge in the 1660s. He thought the Celts had built it for their priests, called Druids, but that turned out to be wrong. Radiocarbon dating of this prehistoric monument shows that its constructors built it in phases over several centuries. The construction started around 3100 BCE and continued till around 1600 BCE. First, about 5,000 years ago, it was just a round ditch in the ground. Then people added wooden posts. Around 2600 BCE, they brought big blue stones from Wales. Later, they added sarsens, even bigger stones, each weighing as much as 5 elephants. They moved those stones from 19 miles away and placed them in a big circle with 5 tall stone arches shaped like a horseshoe. Experts think building Stonehenge took more than 20 million hours of hard work. And that's a lot of teamwork, strength, and planning for people who didn't even have machines. These days, there are a few different ideas about what Stonehenge was really used for. Some experts think it was a sacred place where people gathered for religious ceremonies. Others believe it was an early kind of science center used to study the sky and track time. Both groups notice that the stones at Stonehenge are lined up with the sun and moon. So people may have used the site to mark the changing seasons, especially during the summer and winter solstices. Some think it worked like a giant calendar, helping people figure out dates or predict things like solar eclipses. Stonehenge was an ancient cremation burial site too, at least for some time. Anyway, if we continue with the flagstones versus Stonehenge comparison, we can't but dwell more on the age of these monuments. Flagstones is older than Stonehenge. In fact, it's one of the oldest UK monuments. It's really special because it's the most ancient big round enclosure ever found in Britain. According to the newest studies, its age is about 5,200 years old. After it was built, more and more round monuments started popping up in other places too. Before its construction, most ancient monuments were long and straight, like rectangular barrows or burial mounds, or long ditches called cursus monuments. Some had even more random shapes, but the flagstones monument shows a big change. People were starting to build in circles instead. Some experts think this idea of circular monuments might have come from Ireland, where people were already burying cremated bodies in round tombs. On the other hand, even though flagstones has turned out to be older than Stonehenge, the new findings suggest that Stonehenge might need to be redated. Some of the objects found at Stonehenge, like animal bones, are actually older than the main structure itself. For example, near the entrances to Stonehenge, archaeologists found deer bones and cattle skulls that date to around 3,200 BCE. Experts used to think that people kept those bones for a long time before burying them. But it's possible there was an early version of Stonehenge made from overlapping pits that existed before the big circular ditch was built around 2,900 BCE. Now, could flagstones and Stonehenge have been part of a bigger shared tradition? Could there have been other ancient cremation burial sites in the UK? After all, these constructions aren't the only round prehistoric monuments in Britain. In Wales, there's a similar site called Llandegaihenge, which also looks like a circular burial place. Such a way of burying the deceased might have been a common custom across the UK because you can see similar structures in Eastern Ireland. In the Boyne Valley, for example, there are ancient places like the Mound of the Hostages that people used in the same way. Now, researchers want to do more digging in Ireland to see if some of those monuments were built before 3200 BCE. If they're even older than flagstones, they might help explain where the idea of building round burial sites started and why people across Britain and Ireland were building them. The more we learn, the better we'll understand what these sites were really for and how the people back then might have shared beliefs and traditions across the sea. Hopefully, one day, we'll figure out the mystery of flagstones, one of the oldest monuments in the UK.
Scientists found an entire city of Gaiangola that was hidden beneath the dense jungles of Mexico for 600 years. It covers 360 hectares, had over 1,000 buildings, 2.5 miles of defensive walls, a network of internal roads, and a well-planned urban layout with temples and ball courts, and separate neighborhoods for the elites and commoners. For centuries, people believed there was just an abandoned fortress there, based on stories passed on from generation to generation. Until recently, there was no way to see how truly huge it was without spending years on the ground. But thanks to the new technology, a remote sensing tool called LiDAR, they got a 3D model of the area in just 2 hours from a plane. Gaiangola was built between the years 1350 and 1521. It was a crucially important place for the Zapotec people, a group that had lived in the area since around 700 BCE. In Gaiangola, families lived together in homes with big patios in the middle, surrounded by rooms. When families got bigger, they built more rooms and made their homes larger. The study found that both the leaders and regular people worked together to make the city better. Because Gaiangola was surrounded by mountains, they used this land wisely and built their houses in a way that fit the slopes and let rainwater flow naturally. This helped keep their homes safe and strong. They were built so well that many of these buildings are still standing, even after hundreds of years. There are 2 pyramids in the center of the city. They may have been used as temples where the priests celebrated rites and ceremonies to their deities. The priests brought offerings to the altars, and the people assembled at the 2 squares that are now sunken. Then, there is also a palace with 64 rooms, some of them with circular columns on several sloped terraces. There are patios with many stairways all connected to each other. The sensing tool also found a round-shaped lookout point on a natural rock, where the Zapotec people could see their foes approaching from a distance. Researchers also noticed 2 circular structures that could have been used to watch the stars and measure time. They also found some tombs, so there was most definitely a city cemetery. By the end of the 1400s, the Zapotec people controlled a large territory on the Pacific coast and had successfully defended their land from the Aztecs, who were trying to take over more territory. They did the almost impossible and survived a 7-month-long siege at Gaiangola. When they won this conflict and kept control of the southern part of Mesoamerica, the Zapotecs didn't need to live in Gaiangola anymore. Staying in the mountains had its pros, but they needed fresh water and good farmland to grow food. The small city of Tehuantepec, just 12 miles away, had these conditions, so they moved there just before the Spanish arrived in 1521. Over time, Zapotec traditions started to fade, but their culture didn't disappear completely, and more than 300,000 Zapotec people still live in Oaxaca state in Mexico. They speak their own languages and keep their traditions alive. Creating the 3D model of the lost city is just the beginning of the research. Archaeologists hope that future studies of Gaiangola will help us learn more about how the Zapotecs were organized, how they ruled their cities, and how they interacted with the Spanish when they arrived. They plan to study all 1,100 buildings found in the LiDAR scan, and it will take a few years. Instead of digging up the ruins, they will use special technology to scan the land and learn more about the city without damaging it. This same tech helped scientists find another massive ancient city that lay hidden beneath the thick green canopy of the Amazon forest. A whole network of houses, plazas, roads, and canals was hiding in the shadow of a mighty volcano. For centuries, many scientists assumed that ancient Amazonian people lived in tiny huts, clearing patches of land to survive. But this city, built 2,500 years ago and inhabited for 1,000 years, proves the opposite. Now, scientists think tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people lived in complex urban societies. Scanning the area found 6,000 rectangular platforms, each measuring around 66 by 33 feet, and standing 6 to 9 feet high. These structures were arranged in clusters around central plazas, with straight roads with perfect right angles and paths connecting them. One of the roads was 16 miles long. Building straight roads like this is far harder than just following the landscape. Some of these roads may have had deep spiritual or ceremonial significance. The volcano's rich soil helped the civilization thrive, but it may also have led to its downfall. Researchers also found signs of threats to the cities, such as ditches that blocked entrances to the settlements. Maybe some people living nearby were trying to get in. The next step for the researchers will be studying the adjoining 116 square miles to know more about this large, complex society that could be bigger than the well-known Mayan societies in Mexico and Central America. Meanwhile, in 1963, a man in Turkey discovered an ancient city while renovating his own house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He kept digging and saw a tunnel. It led to the Derinkuyu underground city. It's one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements in Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. The inhabitants lived on 8 levels and had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors were connected by an extensive network of tunnels. The underground city was probably built as a shelter. The construction is hiding at 279 feet deep, and you can't see it from the outside. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people with their livestock and food supplies. There was also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. Archaeologists believe that Phrygians first built the levels. The Romans used and enhanced the structure later. The golden time of Derinkuyu was during the Byzantine era. The next lost and found city appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts, so no one could be sure it really existed. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt until one archaeologist and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Thonis-Heracleion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists believe the 16-foot-tall statue and the temple remains are the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Ammon. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals, sort of like an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis-Heracleion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, it got covered with water. Then Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heracleion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heracleion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So after the tragedy, many ships heading for Heracleion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heracleion lost its glory until its discovery in 2000. The Sahara Desert is like a Mad Max movie. Scorching heat, endless dunes, and an overall barren wasteland. A place where no one could live, right? Well, forget all you know about it, because 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush paradise of grasslands, lakes, and rivers. and the home of a ghost civilization that vanished without a trace. Our tale begins in the 1930s, when a Hungarian explorer stumbled upon a cave in the middle of the Sahara. Inside, he found something bizarre: ancient rock paintings of people swimming in a lake, surrounded by giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles. At the time, everybody shrugged it off as some symbolic depiction of the afterlife, because, really, who would imagine a lake in the Sahara? Well, fast forward some 70 years later, when a group of archaeologists made a discovery that flipped the script. In a rock shelter in Libya, they unearthed 15 mummies, along with baskets, ceramic pots, and other everyday items. This may look like prehistoric junk to most people, but to archaeologists, it was like uncovering a key piece of evidence. Those people weren't just passing through, they lived here. You see, those weren't just any mummies. They were some of the oldest naturally mummified humans ever found, dating back over 7,000 years. Take that, Egypt. 2 of them still had readable DNA, preserved thanks to a rare natural mummification process, almost a miracle considering the Sahara's climate's ability to turn everything into, well, beef jerky. Scientists struggled to understand where those mummies came from for a while, because the mitochondrial DNA they recovered was not helpful at all. But thanks to scientific progress, they eventually managed to do a full genome analysis that revealed some weird secrets. Those people belonged to a human lineage that was completely unknown, and they lived isolated from the rest of humanity for thousands of years. For decades, researchers assumed that the place where they lived, the Green Sahara, was like a prehistoric highway, a lush corridor that humans and animals used to migrate between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. But the mummies demolished that theory, like a hippo sitting on a sandcastle. Their DNA showed zero genetic mixing with sub-Saharan and Eurasian migrants, keeping their genes pure for 7,000 years. Their closest genetic relatives weren't their neighbors living right below the famous desert, but some ancient hunter-gatherers from Morocco, and even some guys that lived in the Czech Republic, when it wasn't even a country yet, 50,000 years ago. We're not out of the woods yet, because those mummies also carried some teeny-tiny traces of Neanderthal DNA, just 10% of the amount found in modern Eurasians. Now, if you paid attention in school, then you know that Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia, and early humans only mixed with them after migrating out of Africa. But those Green Sahara folks never left Africa. So how did they get Neanderthal genes? The leading theory is that their ancestors mingled with Neanderthals in North Africa 50,000 years ago before settling in the Sahara and cutting off contact with the outside world. Archaeologists also found cattle bones and tools made of stone and wood at that rock shelter, proving that those people led a thriving pastoral lifestyle. This discovery made scientists scratch their heads for a while because, you see, animal domestication was not developed in Africa. So how did they learn it if they never mingled with anyone? Did they have ancient YouTube tutorials? Probably not. The researchers believe they must have traded knowledge with neighboring groups, but just knowledge, no saliva. It's almost too hard to believe that no outsiders mixed with them. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a thriving civilization in the middle of a green paradise, drinking milk, eating meat, and even using animal blood as a protein source? Ooh, yummy. They didn't have to hunt for every meal, thanks to their livestock, and the abundant water made life pretty sweet. And yet, they never married outsiders. Why? Maybe it was a cultural choice to never date outside their own group. Or maybe the landscape itself kept them isolated. This is where scientists place their bets. They believe that the dense forests and rivers that existed in the Green Sahara acted like nature's no trespassing sign, creating a geographical barrier that isolates animals, plants, and whole societies. This isolation is the reason why their genes were so unique. These guys weren't swapping spit with anyone else. But this genetic time capsule almost didn't survive. For most of the last ice age, the Sahara was even harsher than today, a true dead zone where humans couldn't survive. 70,000 years ago, even the toughest people disappeared, retreating to the Nile Valley and the Mediterranean coast. Why? Because Earth was a climate bully. Massive glaciers stole all the moisture, weakening monsoons until rain clouds barely reached North Africa. Then came the knockout punches. Armadas of icebergs flooded the North Atlantic, triggering devastating droughts each time. This was the Sahara's ultimate keep-out era. Now, you're probably wondering how in the world the Sahara turned green after all this, and then went back to being a desert again. Well, it all started 15,000 years ago, I wasn't around then, when Earth was shaking off the last ice age. Our planet's axis was a bit wobbly, and because of that, the northern hemisphere got closer to the sun, getting extra sunlight and heat. This eternal summer turned North Africa into a giant moisture magnet, pulling water from the Atlantic and making it all rain down on the Sahara. The result of this ridiculous amount of rain was a lush savanna, complete with lakes the size of small countries. But the African humid period was not just a one-time miracle. The truth is, this eternal on and off switch between green and desert happened to the Sahara more than 230 times since the desert was born. During one of these events, the Sahara even expanded, getting bigger than it is today. So when the green Sahara showed up, you can bet it brought the ultimate ecosystem glow-up. This wasn't just a light dusting of grass. We're talking full makeover. The transformation was so complete, it even reshaped animal populations. Cheetahs suddenly struggled with the new prey dynamics, while rodents like the multi-mammate mouse thrived in the suddenly abundant grasslands. But don't pack your prehistoric swim trunks just yet. This paradise had teeth. The Sahara was an ecological maze of crocodile-infested rivers, malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and big cats lurking in the tall grass. Crossing it would have been like playing a real-life game of Hungry Hippos. This is probably why more groups didn't settle permanently. The Sahara's climate cycled between wet and dry every 20,000 years, hardly a stable zip code. For most ancient people, it was smarter to treat the green Sahara like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grab resources and leave before the desert returned. Still, this green Sahara period lasted for 10,000 years, giving our mystery shepherds plenty of time to thrive. But around 5,000 years ago, Earth's axis shifted again, the rains moved away, and the Sahara dried up faster than a puddle in July. As the desert returned, the shepherds from the green Sahara had no choice but to pack up their livestock and leave. Some researchers believe they migrated toward the Nile, laying the groundwork for ancient Egypt, so I guess their legacy lives on. Besides, their pure lineage may be extinct by now, but some faint genes of the mummies can still be found in the people that live in North Africa today. But the introvert mummies were not the only ones using the green Sahara as an Airbnb. They actually had neighbors just around the corner, in a lakeside village in Niger to be exact. Those people thrived for 5,000 years and left behind the oldest Sahara Desert cemetery, including a man buried in a turtle shell, a grinning Halloween man with filed teeth, and a heartbreaking family embrace frozen in time, victims of the very waters that sustained them. Eventually, those people disappeared too, just like it happened to our antisocial friends. This proves that this desert outsmarts everyone, with a landscape that gives paradise with one hand and takes it away with the other.
360 years ago, a massive British ship, the London, blew up in the Thames estuary. The tragedy took over 300 lives, including the sailors and their loved ones. No one knows exactly what led to all this, but scientists are finally getting close to the truth. Divers accidentally found an exceptionally well-preserved bronze cannon from the ship. This cannon, that was buried in silt and clay for centuries, could have all the answers. The London was a service ship built for the Navy of the Commonwealth of England. It set off on its first journey in June 1656. The ship played a huge role in British history as it was part of a convoy that went to the Netherlands in 1660 to collect Charles II and restore him to the throne. 5 years later, in March 1665, it was traveling from Chatham to Hope. From there, the Admiral Sir John Lawson was supposed to take it to the sea. But just before reaching the buoy of the Knower, the gunpowder suddenly blew up on the ship. About 25 people who were in the roundhouse and coach survived, but over 300 drowned. The ship broke into two pieces. Henry Bennett, the Earl of Arlington, passed along rumors that it all happened because of cheap, low-quality gunpowder that was on the ship. When experts of that time inspected the shipwreck, they concluded that the cannons could still be salvaged, but the ship itself was a total loss. Later, when someone recovered some of them in 1679, there was a scandal where they tried to use them to settle a completely unrelated debt. In 2005, divers rediscovered the London. To protect it, port authorities even had to move the shipping lane, and a team of archaeologists got to work exploring it. That wreck is a big deal because it gives us real insights into English naval history. Visibility in the Thames estuary can be terrible. Sometimes you can't even see a foot and a half in front of you. Working on the site is also super tough because it's in a crazy tidal environment, and a busy shipping lane, where huge cargo ships constantly pass by, is still near. So when a cannon suddenly appeared, stuck deep in the clay, it meant the conditions had to be absolutely perfect. Experts believe the find is from the Commonwealth era, and it's medium size, about 8 feet 6 inches long. It was part of a special set made specifically for the London and was placed on the ship's lower deck. Every single gun carriage on the London was one of a kind because all of its cannons came from different countries and different periods in naval history. Big cannons were really rare and crazy expensive to make since they needed tons of bronze or iron and had to be individually cast. That's why the Navy often grabbed cannons from captured rival ships, old shipwrecks, or decommissioned vessels. The new find is one of the clues that could eventually help scientists to solve the mystery of the London tragedy. So far, they've also found leather shoes, pieces of instruments, wooden tools, rope, and a compass. All these artifacts are like puzzle pieces to them. They still don't have enough evidence to be sure, but it looks like both the pipe and candles could have been sources of flames that set off a larger bang. Some workers made another amazing find at a flooded quarry in nearby southeast England, about 60 miles southeast of London. They stumbled upon the remains of a rare Elizabethan-era ship hundreds of yards away from the nearest coastline. Finding a ship from the late 1500s is a huge deal, because very few vessels from that time have survived. Studying it could help scientists answer some big questions about an important era in history, when England was becoming a major player in European trade. Today, the quarry site is about 1,000 feet from the sea, but back in the 1500s, it was actually part of the coastline. Archaeologists think the ship either wrecked on a rocky headland or someone dumped it there when it was too damaged to sail anymore. Scientists haven't identified it yet, but they studied over 100 pieces of its wooden hull, reading the tree rings, and found that it was built from English oak trees cut down between 1558 and 1580. At that time, Northern Europe was switching from the old clinker method where the planks overlapped like fish scales to the carvel style from the Mediterranean, where the planks are smooth and flush against each other, nailed to an internal frame. Old wood usually rots away pretty fast when it's exposed to air or water. But if it's buried under a thick, oxygen-free layer of mud or silt, it can survive for centuries. That's exactly what happened here. The team is using laser scanning and digital photography to document everything about the wreck. Once they finish their research, they plan to rebury the timbers under the silt in the quarry lake, so the ship can stay there safe for many more centuries to come. A team of archaeologists in Norway found a ship in an even more unexpected location, in a flat field. There's a hill nearby called Gel Mound. It's actually a huge burial monument that the Vikings themselves had built. The farmer who owns the field wanted to dig some drainage ditches, but first, he needed experts to check for anything important underground. Archaeologists used a high-resolution georadar attached to a tractor-like vehicle. When they scanned the field, they discovered that it used to be packed with burial mounds, at least 8 new ones nobody had ever found before. And beneath one of the mounds, the radar picked up the outline of a ship. Back in Viking times, ships were super valuable, so they only buried them with really important people. Scientists have only found 3 boat burials in all of Norway before, and this is the first new one in years. The team believes this ship is from Viking times, probably between the years 500 and 1000 CE. Because the burial mound above it got flat over time, the ship is now only about 1.6 feet below the ground. That's super close to the surface. It's around 66 feet long, and the radar showed that parts like the keel and the floorboards are still preserved. The archaeologists plan to explore more using non-invasive tools so they don't wreck anything by accident. If they need to, they'll start an excavation. Far away from Norway in the Namibian desert, a miner looking for gems accidentally found a legendary shipwreck almost 500 years old. The workers called in an archaeologist to check it out, and they thought it must have been the remains of a Portuguese trading ship, the Bom Jesus, that had mysteriously vanished in the 1500s. The Bom Jesus had left Lisbon loaded with treasures, aiming for India. But somewhere along the southern tip of Africa, a brutal storm slammed it into the Namibian coast. The ship smashed into rocks, broke apart, and disappeared under the waves. When archaeologists explored the wreck, they found parts of the ship scattered across the shore and buried under thick sand, which actually saved the remains from rotting away. They even discovered treasure, over 40 tons of cargo that had spilled out of the captain's chest underwater when the hull broke. There were cannons, swords, fabrics, tools sailors used to navigate by the stars. And most impressive of all, 1,845 copper ingots, solid pieces of metal weighing 16 to 17 tons in total. Scientists could even read the old trademarks stamped on them, revealing they were made by a mega-rich German trading company. And then there was the real jackpot. More than 2,000 gold and silver coins from all over the world, Portugal, Venice, France, and the Moorish states. Plus 105 giant elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely on their way to become luxury goods like jewelry and fine carvings. DNA tests later showed the ivory came from West African forest and savanna elephants. They didn't find many bones though, which means the crew either managed to escape or were lost forever at sea.
Something strange is lurking beneath the sands of Giza, and scientists have no idea what it is. Archaeologists just found a hidden structure near the Great Pyramid using advanced ground scanning technology. What's inside? Nobody knows, but excavations are already underway. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most famous monuments on Earth, but it doesn't stand alone. It's surrounded by an ancient necropolis, a massive royal graveyard filled with tombs and monuments. They belong to pharaohs, nobles, and other high-ranking officials. Most of these tombs are above the ground. They're called mastabas, rectangular, flat-roofed tombs built from limestone or mud brick, and they've been studied for decades. But from old movies, we know that these weren't simple graves. They have deep vertical shafts leading to underground burial chambers, where the past was sealed away for eternity. And recently, archaeologists found one curious empty space in the cemetery, a completely unexplored patch of ground. No mastabas, no visible ruins, nada. For years they ignored it, but between 2021 and 2023, they decided to investigate. They didn't dig though. Instead, they used a technology that kind of acts like X-rays for the ground. These radars let scientists see the secrets hidden there. And there was something hidden beneath the sand, something deliberately buried and forgotten. A two-part underground structure. One part was shallow and L-shaped. It's about 33 feet long and buried just 6.5 feet deep. But below that, a deeper, more mysterious anomaly, a structure completely different from anything else in the area. They called it a highly resistive anomaly, which means it's dense and solid, likely made of stone, sand, or even metal. And still, no one has a clue what's inside it. Now, it's clear that humans made the L shape. It wasn't formed by nature. And the shallower structure might have been an entrance to whatever is hidden below. But they only have some theories about what might be hidden there. It's also filled with sand and gravel. It was probably deliberately backfilled after its construction, perhaps to preserve this. Why? Well, we don't know yet. The archaeological team will need to excavate to understand what exactly this thing was and why it was built. The first guess is a lost burial chamber. Many tombs in Giza have underground burial sites, but most have clear surface markers. This one, for some reason, has nothing, but it could be one of them. The second guess is an ancient offering chapel. Egyptologists know that some chapels were built in this shape, but usually they were above ground, not buried like this. And finally, it might be something we've never seen before. If this turns out to be a new type of structure, it could rewrite what we know about the burials of pharaohs. The only way to know for sure is to dig it up, and that's exactly what's happening right now. Excavations are already underway. Archaeologists are racing against time to uncover the truth. But there's a real danger there too. Giza's fragile ancient structures need to be handled carefully. Otherwise, they could be damaged beyond repair. So all we can do is wait for the truth. Now, these tombs always held fascinating mysteries. Unfortunately, we'll never learn tons of these mysteries because of some relentless tomb robbers. Egyptian tombs were built to guard the bodies for eternity. But that absolutely didn't stop people from breaking in and stealing everything valuable inside. They've been bothering these ancient sites for thousands of years, starting way back in Pharaoh's times. Many of the most famous tombs, including those in Giza, Saqqara, and the Valley of the Kings, were looted. It was a common practice in ancient Egypt. And they were serious about this whole thing. They dug secret tunnels to bypass traps and walls, bribed or threatened tomb workers to get inside knowledge, cracked open sarcophagi to grab gold, jewelry, and artifacts. And by the time modern archaeologists got to most of these tombs, they had already been picked clean. The reigning pharaohs got tired of this infuriating nonsense. The Valley of the Kings, the famous burial ground of Egyptian royalty, was supposed to be the ultimate safe zone. Tombs were built deep underground, hidden in the desert. Passages were sealed with giant stone blocks. False doors and traps were added to confuse thieves. Even curses were written on the walls, warnings of horrible endings for anyone who dared to disturb the tomb, which is exactly where we got all those horror stories about mummies from. Spoiler alert, none of it worked. Most tombs in the Valley of the Kings were fully robbed within 100 years of being sealed. Even King Tutankhamun's tomb, one of the most famous in history, was broken into twice in ancient times. Some of them decided to try and fight back. The New Kingdom rulers built hidden unmarked tombs in a way that should have prevented the looters from finding them, but didn't work. Some pharaohs, like Ramses II, were moved in secret to prevent their bodies from being stolen. Nope, didn't matter. The grave robbers always won. That's because tomb raiders weren't just random thieves. They were skilled, organized, and well-connected. They knew exactly where to look. Many were the ones who had built these sites in the first place, and they knew where the entrances were. If they couldn't smash through the doors, they'd dig through the walls, floors, and even ceilings to break inside. They also worked fast, often within a few years after the tombs were sealed, before anyone forgot where the valuable stuff was. The Khufu's pyramid, the one that's next to this newly discovered structure, was looted long before modern times. The one thing left inside when explorers got there? An empty granite box where the sarcophagus used to be. Unfortunately, it's not just about gold. History itself gets stolen during these raids. Ancient Egyptians wrote detailed records of what exactly and where they buried. So when archaeologists compare these lists to what's found, they can see what's missing, which is often everything valuable. Most artifacts don't end up in museums. They just disappear into private collections, where they can never be studied again. Which is, of course, completely unfair. In fact, a few countries have had enough and started passing laws to take historical artifacts back from private collectors. In Italy, if you own an ancient Roman artifact, you must prove you got it legally. China is actively hunting down stolen artifacts, and they must find ways to retrieve it back from the Western collectors. In Egypt, they passed new laws making it illegal for private citizens to own any ancient Egyptian artifacts at all. Other countries, like the US, the UK, Germany, or Switzerland, are completely fine with rich guys owning their history. The British Museum is built on looted things. European empires invaded half the planet and took whatever they wanted back home. Their museums are often full of such stolen artifacts, and unfortunately, they refuse to give most of them back. For example, the Rosetta Stone. It was taken from Egypt by Napoleon's army, then stolen again by the British after they beat the French. Egypt has been demanding to return for years, but they still can't get it back. Or the Parthenon marbles. These magnificent massive Greek structures were taken from the Parthenon in Athens by a British lord in the 19th century. Greece has been begging for them back ever since, but the UK doesn't feel like it. Not to mention tons of Mesoamerican artifacts, scattered in various museums across the world. European explorers raided Mayan and Aztec temples, took statues, jewelry, and sacred objects, and now Mexico is fighting to get them back. Well, wouldn't it be surprising even if this mysterious underground chamber has somehow been looted already? But if it's a newly found place, could it be one of the few that escaped the hands of grave robbers? Could there still be ancient artifacts, untouched for 4,500 years? We can only hope that those guys didn't get there first. Okay, what if I tell you that the extraterrestrials we all imagine as little green men may actually look like very normal Earthlings and chill in Europe? This is the Iberian Peninsula, and people living there are under suspicion. Ooh. Here's the reason. Somehow, parts of the most important artifacts that the Iberian civilization called Treasure of Valena are made of metal that simply can't be found on Earth, because it's metal from a meteorite. Now let's tackle this step by step. This is the artifact itself, and it's composed of 59 different objects. Bowls, bottles, and bracelets. Is there a pattern there with all those bees? In total, the find weighs around 20 pounds, of which 18 pounds are 23.5 karat gold. Now, if you're not a metal specialist, I'll clarify it for you right away. For comparison, 23 karat gold is 95.8% pure gold, so 23.5 karat is even purer. The remaining percentage goes to other metals to help add strength and durability to the precious alloy. There was also silver, iron, and amber in that set. The artifact could have been pretty straightforward, but for these two, let's call them imposters. Look at this wrought iron bracelet and this hollow hemisphere. Can you see that? Those rusty lines on the hemisphere and the overall weird color of the bracelet do stand out, since everything else is made of purest gold. This all started back in 1963, when a researcher noticed a dark leaden metal among the shiny bowls and bottles. The metal was shiny in some areas and covered with a ferrous-looking oxide that was mostly cracked. Now, just so you understand, gold does not usually act this way. Gold is one of the least reactive of all metals, so it won't even tarnish, let alone rust. To figure out where this suspicious iron came from, researchers turned to mass spectrometry, which checks out the mass-to-charge ratio of molecules. Their findings showed that the nickel in the iron is similar to that found in meteoritic iron. Simply put, the bracelet and the hemisphere are of extraterrestrial origin. Ooh. Now, the exact age of the trove is hard to determine, yet it's crucial. We need to know the exact age to see if it coincides with the start of the Iron Age in the Iberian Peninsula. If it does, then no further questions here. But if it doesn't, well, it's, at the very least, weird, if not suspicious. So there's this three-age system. It comprises the Stone Age, then the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. The Stone Age is of no importance here, so let's compare the Bronze and the Iron Ages. The Bronze Age began when it was realized that combining copper and tin produced a material that was more durable than either metal alone. This era was all about major upgrades in tools and weapons, but two standout inventions were writing systems and the wheel. Then came the Iron Age. This time was all about slowly bringing iron into everyday life. Iron was way easier to shape into cool designs than bronze. Now this was a big deal because iron, especially transformed into steel, provided significant improvements in all aspects of life. Tools became lighter, cheaper, and stronger compared to their bronze equivalents. You get it? Good. So researchers have long debated whether the treasure dates back to the post-Argaric era or the latter part of the Bronze Age. The most recent study claims that those artifacts were created in 1400 to 1200 BCE, and something really doesn't add up. First off, the Iron Age began around 500 years after these artifacts were crafted. Plus, ancient craftsmen couldn't know back then how to work with metals that landed on Earth approximately 1 million years ago. And while the dates are really hard to explain, there is a logical explanation for the craftsmanship. The theory here is that those metal workers simply had access to the fallen meteorite, and thus they could study it well and discover its properties before using it for decorative purposes. They could have figured it out through trial and error, and once they knew exactly how to work with this extraterrestrial metal, they proceeded to adorn the artifacts with it. Plus, there were the Phoenicians, who contributed to their craftsmanship. Now, it's true that the Iberian people have been processing metal and making pottery long before the Phoenicians settled on the peninsula. But the arrival of new metalworking techniques and the introduction of the potter's wheel enabled them to produce better quality goods much faster than before. So, we figured out the extraterrestrial origins of the Iberian artifacts. But guess what? This area is still under suspicion. The reason for that is the language they spoke. You see, for most modern languages people use today, there will always be some proto-language. Say for Italian, Spanish, and French, it's Latin, hence their similarities. But wait, Iberian was largely spoken where modern Spain is, so why isn't Spanish similar to it? Well, the truth is, no language today is similar to the Iberian. Maybe only the Basque language, but it's because of some similarities found in their numerical systems. Basque is classified as a language isolate, or simply unrelated to any other known languages, and the only language isolate in Europe. The Iberian language is unclassified. While the scripts written in it have been deciphered to various extents, the language itself remains largely unknown. And look at the alphabet the Iberians had. Looks like it doesn't really belong to our planet. But hold up, this one might be a bit of a stretch. When the Phoenicians came to the peninsula, they brought along their alphabet to the Iberians. But honestly, the Iberians probably weren't keen on just copying someone else's writing system, so they tweaked it until it looked completely different. Let's just say they took some inspiration and ran with it. While linguists can guess to some extent how most characters sounded, actually translating the language is still completely impossible. The Iberian language was non-Indo-European and faded away over 2,000 years ago. And there aren't any similar languages left to help us out. Super frustrating, right? Yeah. We got over 2,000 Iberian inscriptions from tombs, coins, potteries, lead plates, and even cave wall carvings. But aside from a handful of words, we're totally in the dark about what they mean. Now, if we could understand their language, we might have learned that they were great thinkers and all, but we can only contemplate the works of art they left. Iberian culture has a lot of amazing stuff made by talented artisans. We're talking about not just metalwork and ceramics, but also detailed sculptures, textiles, jewelry, and other personal bling. But here's the catch. Making all those luxury items depended a lot on a big farming class. At the heart of Iberian society, most folks were involved in farming and taking care of livestock. Depending on where you were, the types of farming varied. For example, up in the north, they were all about growing grains, while down in Valencia, they focused on producing olive oil and other agricultural aspects. In the west, raising animals was the name of the game. Still, we don't have much information about the day-to-day lives of the many people doing this essential work. Yet, on the flip side, We know a lot about the upper class of Iberian society, who control these agricultural resources and hire the artisans. By the 7th century BCE, we start to see a group of Iberian princes who were living the good life, trading with the Phoenicians and enjoying fancy luxury items. You can spot this elite class in their burial practices. Cremation was the go-to method for funerals among the Iberians, and wealthy individuals were often found in cemeteries with all sorts of lavish goods and funerary sculptures that give us a peek into the fashion and hairstyles of the rich. Interestingly, starting in the 6th century BCE, there was a noticeable drop in the number of recognizable burials, which suggests that these elaborate funeral customs became more exclusive to a small elite. Meanwhile, the fate of the majority, farmers, artisans, soldiers, and laborers, who made up a big chunk of the population, remains a bit of a mystery. It used to be a pretty advanced civilization, but it vanished without a trace. Researchers think it could have been due to some massive earthquake, but so far, we don't know for sure. Now, this bad boy was the size of a husky and could maybe pass for one, except it didn't have any fur and was a top predator with extra long, blade-like canine teeth. Ooh, charming. Meet the earliest known saber-toothed animal to have ever lived. It roamed the Earth well before the dinosaurs. Scientists made the description of this creature based on its fossils found on the Spanish island of Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. About 200 million years ago, none of us were around then, the very first true mammals appeared, and they lived right alongside the dinosaurs. But if we trace the family tree of mammals even further back, we'll find an ancient group called Therapsids. They didn't look like mammals we have today, but they had some key features that would eventually help define mammals. For example, Therapsids had special openings on the sides of their skulls for jaw muscles, and parts of their jaw bones would later evolve into the tiny middle ear bones that all mammals, including you, have today. So, the new discovery is what might be the oldest known Therapsid fossil. The fossil, which doesn't have an official species name yet, belongs to a group called Gorgonopsians. Those guys are more closely related to mammals than they are to any other living animals. Some of them were as small as cats, and others were as massive as polar bears. Gorgonopsians had some very mammal-like traits, like different types of teeth for different jobs. But unlike mammals, these ancient predators kept replacing their teeth, even their giant saber-like canines, over and over during their lives. Hey, that would be handy. Until now, the oldest Gorgonopsian fossils we knew about were around 265 million years old. But this new fossil is even older, dating back between 270 and 280 million years. The find was super detailed and complete, including its sharp knife-like fangs, part of its jaw, pieces of its spine, ribs, tailbones, and toe bones, plus most of one of its back legs. Even though the creature's skull wasn't complete, the scientists think it was about 7 inches long, and the animal itself would have been around the size of a medium-large dog, weighing between 66 and 88 pounds. But other than that, it didn't really look much like a dog. Even though it had some lizard-like features, calling it a lizard dog is totally wrong. Mammals and reptiles do share a super ancient ancestor from about 320 million years ago, but their evolutionary paths split a long time ago. When the newly found creature was alive, the island of Majorca was right in the middle of the gigantic supercontinent Pangaea. Back then, this area went through super wet and super dry seasons. Scientists have always wondered if major moments in mammal history happened in tropical places like this, but we just didn't have the right fossils to prove it. Now, with the discovery of the oldest known Gorgonopsian in Majorca, the missing pieces of the puzzle are coming together. It looks like some huge steps in mammal evolution could have happened in low-latitude environments we haven't explored much yet. The so-called gap in the fossil record might just be because paleontologists weren't looking in the right spots. Our hero of the day wasn't the only cool guy rocking the planet before dinos settled in. Over 500 million years ago, the weirdest predators to have ever existed ruled the oceans. The name is a bit tricky to pronounce, so I'm not going to. Okay, it's Anomalocaris, but it just literally means unusual shrimp. This creature looked nothing like anything alive today. Scientists think it was the first true apex predator, the orca of its time. Anomalocaris was massive for its era, as it grew up to 3 feet from its sharp grabbing arms to the tips of its tail fins. For a while, everyone thought trilobites were its go-to meal, but new research shows it wasn't strong enough to crack open trilobite armor. So instead, it was a speedy, agile hunter with awesome vision, and it often picked off soft-body animals that zipped through the open water. Now, another really cool creature from pre-dino times is a fish that could walk on land. Tiktaalik lived in marshy rivers that looked a lot like today's Amazon rainforest. It could grow up to 9 feet long, and it found its prey in rivers and inlets like a modern-day freshwater crocodile. It had a flexible neck and even some early versions of lungs, and thanks to them, it could survive both in water and out of it. Why fish like Tiktaalik started moving toward land about 395 million years ago is still a bit of a mystery. Around that time, the ancient supercontinent called Gondwana was drifting closer to the land that would become North America. This slow movement created lots of shallow, swampy habitats, which were perfect places for crocodile-like animals to thrive. Plus, these areas were near the equator, so they were warm and tropical. But there wasn't a lot of food waiting for them on land, so maybe they moved there for safety reasons. There were fewer predators and better spots to lay eggs there compared to the water. Creatures first adapted to living in open water, then shallow water, then marshes and river edges, and only after a long, slow transition did they finally step fully onto land. Now, how about a millipede the size of a small car and weighing as much as a large dog? This beauty lived over 300 million years ago in what is now England. Back then, during the Carboniferous period, Earth's atmosphere had way more oxygen, over 26%, compared to today's 21%. Scientists used to think the high oxygen levels were the only reason these creatures could get so big. But back then, they found a new fossil from a time when oxygen wasn't that much higher than today. They discovered it purely by accident, when a boulder split just right and revealed one of the most complete and largest giant millipede specimens ever. This one could have lived not just in swampy areas, but also in open woodlands filled with tasty seeds, nuts, and maybe even small animals. There's a chance that this beast wasn't a slow, plant-munching crawler, but a predator that would snap up whatever it could find. After dominating the Earth for about 45 million years, the giant millipedes eventually vanished. Probably the reptiles pushed them out, clearing the way for the age of the dinosaurs. Now, in case you ever wondered what would happen if you crossed a polar bear with a saber-toothed cat, here's the answer. This guy ruled the southern ecosystems after migrating 7,000 miles across the supercontinent Pangaea around 252 million years ago. It had a tough skin like a rhino's and massive canines, perfect for tearing away huge chunks of meat, and it was an excellent runner. Once it got to its new home in what is now South Africa, it replaced a whole group of local predators. But its glory didn't last long, as closer to the end of the Permian period, massive volcanic eruptions made the weather patterns change and wiped out about 90% of all species. And because top predators are usually big, slow to grow, and not super common, they often vanish among the first when massive extinction events hit. And that's how our guy here went extinct. Our final creature of the day was a dragonfly that lived around 300 million years ago and had a wingspan of over 2 feet, 6 long, spiny legs, and huge, bulging eyes. Meganjura. This 4-winged giant is most likely the largest flying insect that ever lived, and it easily outsizes today's dragonflies, which are its distant relatives. Like modern dragonflies, Meganjura like to hang out in open areas near ponds and slow-moving streams. But unlike today's dragonflies, it wasn't just catching tiny bugs. This guy was likely the top predator in these open spaces. It used the spines on its legs like a flying trap to snatch prey out of the air, including other flying insects, small amphibians, and even lizard-like creatures. Scientists found the first fossils of Megajoura in 1880 in the coal-rich rocks in France. The fossils were incredibly well preserved and showed off the detailed vein patterns in their wings. Scientists think Megajoura grew so huge because it didn't have much competition from vertebrates, and the air back then, during the Carboniferous period, had a lot more oxygen than it does today. Archaeologists have been studying Petra in Jordan for 200 years, and in 2024, they found something they had never seen before. It's a tomb with at least 12 complete human skeletons and artifacts that are over 2,000 years old right in front of the treasury. Bronze, iron, and ceramic items were placed with the deceased, which shows how people honored their loved ones when they passed away. It's a rare chance for scientists to learn more about the Nabateans, an ancient group of Arabian nomads who built Petra. The objects found in the tomb under Petra's treasury are in amazing condition, but the skeletons became fragile because it's damp inside the tomb. They plan to study the remains and extract DNA to see if the people in the tomb were related. While some scientists are solving tomb mysteries, others have trained AI to find new ancient sites for them. They've created an algorithm that works with a special type of satellite imagery. This technique uses radio waves that can peek under things like sand, soil, and even ice to find hidden objects. AI will help search a huge desert on the Arabian Peninsula called the Empty Quarter for archaeological treasures. The lead scientists of the experiment trained the algorithm to recognize hidden locations using data from a site they had found before. The new tech can discover buried structures within 20 inches, which is very precise. Another groundbreaking tech, LiDAR, which means light detection and ranging, helped archaeologists reveal new hidden cities all around the world. LiDAR can see big structures beneath layers of vegetation and map even subtle changes in ancient landscapes. They use it to scan large areas from a small plane flying over places that aren't so easy to study from the ground, like dense jungle. In 2024 alone, they found new Maya settlements in southern Mexico, gardens, roads, and rivers in Ecuador's Amazon rainforest, ancient ruins on the Pacific island of Tonga, and the remains of 2 medieval cities along the Silk Road route in Uzbekistan. Maybe some smart technology can also explain what Marge Simpson is doing on Earth in an ancient Egyptian tomb from 3,000 years ago. The drawing, featuring a woman with yellow-colored skin, a blue crown, and a green outfit, is alarmingly like the famous cartoon character. If you don't see a resemblance here, I hope you'll at least enjoy an amazingly well-preserved necklace with amethyst and agate beads. It's from another recent find from Egypt, an ancient tomb with 11 sealed burials near Luxor. Archaeologists also found 2 copper mirrors, one with a lotus-shaped handle and the second with a unique design of the deity of the sky, women, fertility, and love in ancient Egypt. The hair of the figurine was originally made from almost 4,000 mud beads. Another awesome find from 2024 is an ancient Greek shrine with intact burials, a sarcophagus, and plenty of gold inside. They think it was built before the year 300 before the Common Era, and the marble lions, also found inside, were made from the same marble as the Parthenon in Athens. Greece is so full of ancient treasures that the city of Thessaloniki will house around 300,000 of those artifacts in their new subway system. Meanwhile, archaeologists in France have found a monument unlike any other, and they can't figure out what it was used for. It's direct proof that people used to live here between the Neolithic and the early Iron Age periods. The coolest part is a monument made of 3 unique shapes that fit together like puzzle pieces. Some gravel found in the monument could mean there used to be a wooden fence called a palisade. People who built it probably used it for protection or decoration. The team studied the layers of soil around the monument to learn more about its origins. The only tools found so far were sharp flint stones, not the cartoon characters, which were used during the Neolithic period. The next step will be radiocarbon dating to figure out exactly how old the site is. Now, the oldest saddle ever found so far was found in the grave of a woman near the edge of the Taklamakan Desert in northwest China. This saddle is the oldest ever discovered. It was crafted from pieces of leather that were sewn together and stuffed with straw and animal hair to make it soft. Now, normally, things made from natural materials like this don't last very long because they rot or fall apart. But the Taklamakan Desert is so dry that it helped preserve the artifact. The herdswoman who used the saddle was buried in her full riding attire, so this proves that not only men used saddles and took part in herding and traveling. Now let's shift to Guatemala, where an ornate jade mask made by the ancient Maya people was waiting for centuries to be discovered. Scientists use radiocarbon dating to figure out the age of the mask. They believe the mask may represent a Maya storm deity, a powerful figure in their mythology. These kinds of masks were often made to honor Maya royalty, and they were placed in the tombs of kings and queens when they were buried. The king's tomb was also decorated with carvings made using tools crafted from volcanic obsidian. After 15 years of searching, scientists may have finally figured out where the altar stone of Stonehenge comes from. They compared the tiny minerals inside the altar stone with rocks from many places in Wales and England and ruled out lots of spots. Then they found the perfect match with a place in Scotland, more than 466 miles away from Stonehenge. This area might even be Orkney, a group of islands in the far northeast of Scotland where a lot was going on during the Neolithic period. The big question now is how ancient people moved such a massive stone so far. The altar stone is over 16 feet long and weighs more than 6 tons. The new theory is that they might have used boats to carry it across the coastline and rivers. Once it was close to Stonehenge, they theoretically dragged it across the land using wooden sleds, ropes, and a lot of teamwork. Meanwhile, in the north of France, an ancient home popped to the surface during the construction of a new house. It turned out to be a luxury urban house for the elite from the 2nd century of the Common Era. The inside of the house was destroyed by a fire, but under the destroyed layer, there are beautiful, real-size fresco paintings. Turkish archaeologists unearthed the arm and foot bones of elephants that lived around 9 million years ago. They also found fossils of early horses, giraffes, and even saber-toothed cats. They've already identified 43 distinct types of animals from this site and collected more than 4,000 fossils. One more cool find from Turkey is a 64,000-year-old workshop inside Incaja Cave. It looks like people used it for 24,000 years non-stop. There are some tools inside, like flakes and blades, which were made inside the workshop. In eastern Turkey, a farmer accidentally found a 1,000-square-foot mosaic from the late Roman or early Byzantine period just beneath the dirt. Experts say it's a one-of-a-kind thing from this region, and it's still in one piece after all this time. The pattern shows dozens of trees, plants, and animals that were found in ancient Turkey. There could be more treasures in the area, so they plan to keep digging. Our final stop will be in Sicily, where archaeologists uncovered a huge ancient thermal complex. Inside, they found 2 rooms with floors covered in colorful mosaic designs, along with a large courtyard surrounded by arched wings. As they kept digging, they discovered more parts of the ancient city. They found new roads and the remains of a huge complex, along with stretches of old stone walls that were part of the city's fortifications. These discoveries are helping scientists imagine what the city might have looked like during ancient times. No one knows for sure whether the bathhouse was built by the Greeks or the Romans, since both civilizations lived in Sicily long ago.
Big news! Santa is real, and he looks like this. I know it's not exactly how we pictured the jolly old guy, but a recently discovered tomb might just be the proof we've been waiting for to show that St. Nicholas was real and Turkish. Turns out, he wasn't a North Pole native, but a kind-hearted bishop from the 4th century, famous for giving gifts to everyone. The legend says he was a wealthy man born in the ancient city of Patara, modern-day Turkey, who traveled to the countryside to help the poor and the sick. For centuries, though, people couldn't be sure he actually existed. Some historical sources say he was buried in Myra, which is now called Demre, Turkey. Since the 80s, archaeologists have been digging around this area, trying to prove it. And now, their Christmas miracle has finally come true. After digging 6 feet deep in an annex of St. Nicholas's Church, they uncovered a mysterious limestone tomb, about 2 meters long. While they're pretty sure this is St. Nick's final resting place, they're still searching for an inscription to confirm its exact age. Now, if we're talking about the fictional Santa Claus, legend says his home is in Lapland, Finland. Back in 2018, archaeologists made an interesting discovery that could finally prove that Santa was real. They were digging at a site called Tiny Aro when they stumbled upon about 200 burial pits. But when they looked inside, there was definitely no sign of Santa. Actually, there were no human skeletons at all, just a bunch of things like pottery and animal bones. So no one really knows what this place was. That was the complete opposite of what happened with a group of archaeologists working in the ancient city of Petra, Jordan. Since 2003, there have been rumors about hidden chambers beneath the famous monument called Al-Khazneh, also known as the Treasury. 21 years later, a team finally decided to dig and uncovered an intact tomb. Inside, they found at least 12 human skeletons and artifacts estimated to be over 2,000 years old. Hundreds of thousands of tourists travel to Al-Khazneh every year, and most of them probably go there to see the site of the Holy Grail in the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So, do you want to know the funny part? One of the skeletons in the tomb was clutching a ceramic chalice that looked a lot like the Holy Grail. You probably remember the devastating fire that caused massive damage to Notre Dame in Paris back in 2019. Because of that, the building, originally built between the 12th and 13th centuries, had to be restructured. But archaeologists saw it as a golden opportunity to dig into the site and uncover its hidden secrets. The team was only allowed to dig about 16 inches beneath the floor, but that was enough. As soon as they removed the floor tiles and cleared away a thin layer of dirt, they spotted the top of a lead coffin. Then, they found some limestone sculptures, including life-sized heads and torsos. Altogether, they uncovered over 1,000 fragments of different works of art. Ancient statues have been found in the most random places, including a sewer. In July 2024, Bulgarian archaeologists were checking a Roman sewer in the ancient city of Heraclea Sintica when they found a nearly 7-foot-tall marble statue of Hermes, the Greek messenger deity. This town was completely devastated and abandoned after 2 earthquakes, one in the year 388 and the other in the year 425. But somehow, it didn't destroy this statue. In fact, its head was found in surprisingly good condition. Finding ancient artwork is definitely fascinating, but imagine stumbling upon an entire hidden city in the Amazon rainforest. Using high-tech lasers, researchers uncovered a lost civilization with thousands of structures and a whole network of roads, canals, and houses, all buried beneath the dense jungle. This city was built around 2,500 years ago, in an area located in the shadow of a volcano, which, by the way, could have erupted and destroyed this civilization at some point. It's hard to say exactly how many people live there, but experts estimate they stayed up there for about 1,000 years. This discovery proves ancient people also had huge organized cities in the middle of the Amazon. A similar thing happened in Campeche in southern Mexico. An archaeologist was doing some research on the internet when he accidentally discovered a hidden Maya city. This area, now called Valeriana, was huge, about the size of Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. It had pyramids, sports fields, amphitheaters, and paths connecting different districts. Thanks to satellite images, archaeologists uncovered an entire unknown civilization from the Bronze Age. They were checking out aerial images when they discovered 100 prehistoric settlements in the Pannonian Plain, a region that includes parts of what's now Serbia and Hungary. The people who lived there are now known as the Titsa Site Group, and it looks like they were a pretty well-organized society, skilled at growing food, hunting, and fishing. Google Earth helped a team to uncover a mysterious set of 400 ancient gates in Saudi Arabia. These gates, scattered across the desert, are thought to be from thousands of years ago. They're made of stone and arranged in weird formations that have left archaeologists scratching their heads. I mean, they don't look like they were meant for funerals, and they don't seem like structures where people lived. So, we still have no idea what they are. Technology is really changing archaeology. Thanks to artificial intelligence and, well, a $1 million prize, we've finally been able to decipher part of an unreadable and super damaged ancient scroll. The Herculaneum scrolls were discovered by workers digging up the ancient town of Herculaneum near Pompeii in 1752. But their condition was so bad that, for years, they were considered indecipherable. Thankfully, AI has helped unveil their secrets. Based on the studies so far, experts believe that one of these scrolls was written by a philosopher who valued pleasures, like music and food, above all else. No doubt, Stonehenge in England is one of the most mysterious places on Earth. Some theories even suggest it was built by extraterrestrials. After more than a century of research, archaeologists are still figuring out how it came together. See that big altar in the middle? Turns out it came all the way from Scotland. And that's pretty wild, considering this massive sandstone block weighs over 6 tons, and the people who built Stonehenge more than 4,000 years ago didn't have the luxury of wheels or modern tools. We can find some pretty amazing stuff in the oceans too. In 2013, a mysterious shipwreck was found about 20 feet underwater off the coast of Kenya. At the time, no one knew where it came from, but now, researchers are pretty sure this could be a ship from Vasco da Gama's fleet. You know, the famous Portuguese navigator, best known for being the first to sail from Europe to India by rounding Africa's Cape of Good Hope. If it's confirmed, this shipwreck could be one of the earliest European shipwrecks in the Indian Ocean. Ancient treasures can take many forms, including a bottle. Recently, archaeologists in Norway uncovered a 150-year-old message in a bottle during an excavation of a Viking burial mound. The bottle contained a letter written by Anders Lorange, an archaeologist who worked on the site back in the 1800s, along with his business card and a few coins wrapped in paper. The letter gave some details about the excavation, though it seems Lorange got a few things wrong, like the exact number of Viking shields discovered. At the end of the letter, he wrote a personal note in runic script, "Emma Gade, my girlfriend." So it gave us not only insights into history, but also a peek into his love life. A Portuguese archaeologist just discovered a bunch of sunken ships filled with gold, including a Spanish galleon with 22 tons of gold and silver. This much gold today is worth about $2 billion, and this is the money from one ship alone. Archaeologist Alexandre Monteiro made this discovery almost by accident. He was studying some documents when he found some information about a ship that went missing in 1615, and he decided he wanted to find it. After many years, Alexandre found not just this specific ship, he actually discovered 8,620 shipwrecks in the waters of Portugal alone. Out of this number, 250 are gold-filled shipwrecks, a discovery that would make any Jack Sparrow shake in his boots. Most of these ships went down for boring reasons like the weather, but sometimes they were destroyed in battles, which may or may not have been super epic. They were carrying gold and other treasures from the New World to Europe, and of course, everyone wanted a share. Alexandre had been studying historical shipwrecks for 30 years now, so he has discovered many ships that went down in somewhat glorious ways. In 1816, for example, a ship of one of the richest men in Portugal sank in Australia, with an insane amount of 66,000 silver coins. This was the first ship from Portugal to ever plunge in the waters of Australia. The bad news is that these ancient sunken vessels, filled with riches and epic stories, are not so easy to reach. They're deep down in the ocean and covered by sand. You could still try, but that would be stealing part of a country's history. And you wouldn't want to be that person, would you? Naturally, Portugal was not the only country that explored the seas back then. The coast of Europe is packed with sunken ships filled with gold. In fact, there are about 1 million historical shipwrecks underwater right now, and the treasures abandoned under the sea might be worth around $60 billion. It's an insane amount of money, but let me tell you that these gold-filled sunken ships aren't really worth the hassle. There are many stories of maritime treasure discoveries that turned into insane lawsuits and even long jail time. Our first story starts in 1746, when a violent storm crashed a ship called Prince de Conti near an island in Brittany. The ship was filled with tea, ceramics, and 100 gold ingots. Of course, the owners of the ship tried to save the loot, but if it's not easy now, imagine how it was back in the 18th century. It took more than 200 years for the vessel to be found. It finally happened in 1975, when a group of French men discovered it and decided to take pretty much every valuable thing they could find. Now, I said these things were not worth the trouble for a reason. In France, if you find anything that can be historical, you must declare it to the local authorities within 48 hours. Fail to comply, and you will be committing something known as a crime. To be fair, our French friends here did declare their findings, but only the corroded cannons from the ship. And the gold? Well, they sold it. Obviously, because each gold bar is worth between $125,000 to $231,000. It took French authorities almost 50 years to retrieve the stolen gold, and they didn't retrieve all of it. Part of it was bought by an elderly couple living in Florida, and the crime is so serious they were charged for connection with money laundering, organized crime, and the trafficking of cultural goods. The poachers also sold some gold ingots to the British Museum collection. Now, let's go back to the 1850s, when a steamer called SS Central America traveled from Panama to California and back again. This was during the California Gold Rush, a time when 300,000 people moved to California to dig for gold. Because the travel route was not easy breezy, people needed to carry their gold around on big ships. This is where our friend SS Central America comes in. In 1857, the ship had 578 people on board and about 10 tons of gold. Very few survived, and around $100 to $150 million in gold went down with the ship. All of this explains why in 1988, a group of investors from Columbus decided to finance a research project to find this ship. The research was led by a guy named Tommy Thompson. Tommy was really crazy about the idea of finding this sunken ship filled with gold. It took him years to find the exact location of the SS Central America, especially because the ship was 7,500 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, and retrieving it required a lot of fancy tech. A group of 161 investors paid for his adventure, but it goes without saying that they were not doing this out of love from their hearts. They invested $12.5 million in this project because they were expecting to earn at least 10 times more. But since life is not all sunshine and rainbows, 39 insurance companies sued the research team as soon as they retrieved the gold. Back when the ship was up and running, these companies insured the cargo of the SS Central America, and when the cargo was finally retrieved, more than 100 years later, they wanted to be compensated. They said it was not their job to retrieve it, but that doesn't mean they abandoned it. This crazy talk didn't stick, and 92% of the gold was given to the research team. The plot thickened when the investors were scammed by none other than Tommy Thompson, who fled with $4.16 million. He also had 500 gold coins, but he's not telling a soul where they are. Nonsense like this is the reason why most countries have rules to protect cultural properties. And yes, sometimes shipwrecks can be a cultural property. Obviously, there are many maritime treasure discoveries that happen without breaking any laws. The SS City of Cairo, for example, was a steamship that submerged in 1929 with 2,000 boxes of silver coins weighing 122 tons. A company called Deep Ocean Search retrieved the coins from a depth of 17,000 feet, which is 4,500 feet lower than the Titanic. 34 million pounds went to the UK Treasury, and the Deep Ocean Search also got a share. The good news here is that some of the coins can be bought by collectors, legally. Paying for a treasure is probably the closest you can get to an underwater archaeology find. I know, all I did was destroy your piracy dreams. But while raiding gold-filled shipwrecks may be a crime in most countries, or just financially impossible for us mere mortals, not all hope is lost. There is about $771 trillion worth of gold lying on the ocean floor, and it doesn't have an owner. It's like an underwater gold mine, except the gold is in the water. You know how the water of the ocean is salty? Well, the gold gets mixed with the minerals in the water, so it's not like you stumble upon a gold nugget on the beach. Each liter of ocean water has 13 billionths of a gram of gold, and it's very difficult to extract such tiny particles of gold from the water. But that doesn't mean people haven't tried, and, of course, there's been a scam here too. In the 1890s, a guy claimed he had invented a thing that would suck gold from the seawater. When he got enough money, he fled the country with the cash. If you really want to get some gold, you could try to extract it from the Earth's core, which has 1.6 quadrillion tons of gold. There's 16 times more gold in the Earth's core than what humans have mined in the whole of history. No hoax involved here, because nobody has dared to go down there yet. With archaeologists discovering gold-filled sunken ships out and about, maybe we can make our own maritime treasure discoveries, or at least save enough money to buy some silver coins.
You're digging in Egypt's famous Saqqara necropolis, also known as the ultimate VIP graveyard for pharaohs, when suddenly you find a giant pink door hiding something no one knew existed. Behind this giant stone door, one that wasn't supposed to open, by the way, you find a lost tomb of Egyptian royalty. Alright, history lovers, it's time to buckle up because archaeologists just pulled off something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Let's travel all the way to Saqqara, one of Egypt's most mysterious and treasure-packed ancient sites. The star of the show? The prince you've probably never heard of, Prince Userefre, son of King Userkaf. No one important, just, the founder of Egypt's 5th dynasty. No big deal. But the way his tomb was discovered… It all started with a massive door, made of pink granite, no less. But this isn't just a regular stone slab. This thing is about 14 to 15 feet tall and 4 feet wide. A giraffe could easily walk through it. This door is also definitely heavier than your neighbor's SUV. But here's the twist. It wasn't a real door. It was a false door, a symbolic gateway meant to allow the spirit of the deceased to pass between the world of the living and the afterlife. Normally, that's where the story ends. After all, false doors are common in tombs. But this one was extra special. You see, false doors were usually made out of limestone, which was pretty common and found everywhere in Egypt. To build one out of red or pink granite, people had to bring these rocks from a quarry located 400 miles away. And you can bet this wasn't a cheap trip. According to Egyptologists, this is the first time a false door of this size and material has ever been found in Egypt, making it a totally unique piece of architecture. Aside from being super expensive, this one had a surprise behind it too. When the team of researchers investigated further, they realized that this false door actually hid a real entrance. And what did it lead to? A hidden tomb, packed with statues, relics, and secrets from over 4,000 years ago. The tomb belonged to Prince Userefre, but you can call him Wasar-Efra, or Wasar-Efra too. Despite being totally erased from history, this fella was no minor noble. The hieroglyphs on the pink granite door listed him as the hereditary prince, governor of Buto, En-Nekeb, royal scribe, minister, judge, and priest of chance. Phew! He was like the ancient Egyptian version of Daenerys Targaryen. These inscriptions not only identify his political and religious roles, but also suggest he held significant power in Lower and Upper Egypt, bridging both regions through his titles. One title in particular, the Priest of Sekher, links him to the deity of the necropolis, the one with the falcon head. This god was the patron of the living and god of the dead at the same time. So I guess the Forgotten Prince was sort of a big deal, considering that his tomb was placed in such a prestigious location within Saqqara. What's even more mysterious is that Prince Userefre doesn't appear in official king lists or royal family trees, which makes us wonder if he passed away before he could rule, or if his legacy was deliberately erased in one of ancient Egypt's classic political dramas. Some scholars now believe his erasure might be connected with shifting religious or political power struggles during the early 5th dynasty, especially as his father Usarkaf was reshaping Egypt's religious order. And speaking of his father, King Usarkaf was a total game changer. He wasn't just the founder of the 5th dynasty, he also kicked off a religious revolution by promoting the sun god Ra over older deities. That's right, Usarkaf built the very first sun temple at Abu Sir, setting off a dynasty-wide obsession with solar worship. After Usarkaf wrapped up his short but revolutionary reign, a whole lineup of pharaohs took the stage: Sahure, Neferirkare, Nusere-Ini, basically the boy band of the 5th dynasty. And these guys were all about two things: building pyramids and making money. They weren't just stacking stones, they were expanding Egypt's influence, opening up trade routes to far-off lands and blinging out their temples like it was nobody's business. Back in the tomb, things got even cooler. There was a beautiful red granite offering table covered with inscriptions detailing ritual foods, like an eternal menu for the afterlife, because they believed the deceased could magically eat this food. Fun fact, it was the funerary priests and their families that actually ate the food. There were also pottery shards, amulets, and painted walls, but the real showstoppers were the statues. And this is exactly where things get weird, in a good way. The team found statues of King Djoser, the guy who built Egypt's first pyramid, his wife, and their 10 daughters, inside Prince Userefre's tomb. Hold up, Djoser lived a few centuries before Usarkaf, so what were his statues doing there? Turns out, scientists don't really know. These statues were built during the reign of King Djoser himself and probably belonged to that first ever built pyramid. Experts believe these statues were probably relocated during the 26th dynasty, thousands of years after Djoser, maybe to protect them from destruction, or maybe because they were still venerated. Basically, ancient Egyptians were hoarders, but classy ones. Scientists also know for a fact that some engravings and statues found there were made way later, which means that this tomb probably turned into a deposit for fancy stuff. Or maybe this was just really ancient interior decorating. Anyway, that wasn't all. There was another pink granite entrance on the eastern side of the tomb, with inscriptions linking back to King Neferirkare, another 5th dynasty pharaoh who also tried to build his own pyramid, but failed. And near this second entrance, archaeologists found something never seen before in Saqqara: a set of 13 pink granite statues, all sitting in a row on a high-backed bench, like they were waiting at the DMV of the afterlife. Some had elevated heads, probably representing the prince's wives, while others were missing their heads entirely. One black granite statue was found upside down. Maybe it had taken a tumble sometime during the tomb's long, quiet centuries underground. According to archaeologists, the positioning and head shapes suggest that these statues followed a strict social hierarchy, with the central figures likely representing higher status individuals, while the headless ones might indicate unfinished work or later vandalism. And speaking of black granite statues, another one was found standing proudly inside the tomb. Based on its design and inscriptions, it looks like it was placed there during the 26th dynasty, the same time those Djoser statues were probably moved in. This suggests the tomb didn't just sit abandoned, it was reused, adapted, and maybe even honored by later generations. And by the way, black granite was associated with Osiris, the god of the underworld, during the late period, which means that this statue's presence is a clue that the tomb was a ritual space long after the prince's death. All of this, giant granite doors, surprise statues, reused tombs, adds up to a truly thrilling find. Prince Userefre may not be a household name yet, but his tomb is now one of the most fascinating ever found in Saqqara. It tells a story not just of the Old Kingdom, but of how ancient Egyptians kept connecting to their past, even thousands of years later. So, what does it all mean? Why hide a tomb behind a fake door? Why pack it with statues from different eras? And who exactly was Prince Userefre? These are the kinds of mysteries that keep archaeologists digging and keep the rest of us fascinated. In the end, this discovery isn't just about one tomb, it's about how much is still waiting beneath the sands of Egypt. As more gets uncovered, we're reminded again and again that ancient history isn't gone. It's just sleeping behind massive pink granite doors. It's a perfect summer day. You're relaxing on the beach, dipping your toes into the cool water, when suddenly, bam! A 56-foot aquatic nightmare rockets from the waves. It's the size of 2 London double-decker buses, sporting about 60 razor-sharp teeth, including bonus chompers on the roof of its mouth, because why not? This aquatic beast isn't picky about its diet either. Sharks? Turtles? Other sea monsters? Yep, they're all on the menu. Meet the mosasaur, a group of marine reptiles that ruled the oceans millions of years ago. If you've seen Jurassic World, you'll recognize them as the stars of that epic moment when a massive creature leaps out of the water to snatch a great white shark like it's sushi. That's a mosasaurus, and it's every bit as terrifying as it sounds. Recently, scientists stumbled upon a fossil of one of those marine monsters in, of all places, Mississippi. Yes, Mississippi, the land of magnolias and catfish. Turns out it's also home to ancient sea dragons. This discovery was a happy accident. A team of geologists was mapping the terrain in east-central Mississippi when they noticed something strange poking out of the ground. It wasn't a rock or a seashell. It was a vertebra, and a massive one. In fact, it was so large it barely fit in the hand of the scientist who found it. The fossil likely belonged to the largest known species of mosasaur, the Mosasaurus hoffmanni. Now, the biggest mosasaur ever found clocked in at a staggering 56 feet long. This new specimen hit a solid 30 feet at least, and while it might not break the world record, it certainly makes the crown for the biggest mosasaur ever discovered in Mississippi. Fun fact, that's still longer than the average RV, and with way worse gas mileage. To be fair, the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science already had a couple of mosasaur fossils in its collection. But this newcomer might just steal the spotlight. And this isn't an isolated incident. In 2015, paleontologists unearthed the skull of a 24-foot-long mosasaur in North Dakota. Years later, a private fossil hunter, yes, that's a thing, found an equally huge mosasaur in Texas. Well, its jaw at least. These sea monsters, also known as sea dragons, by the way, actually have one of the wildest origin stories in paleontology. The very first skull was found way back in 1764 in a chalk quarry in the Netherlands. And at the time, scientists thought it was a whale. Then came a second skull, which was so impressive that French revolutionaries literally looted it during the siege in 1794. Legend has it they swapped it for 600 bottles of wine. Doesn't sound like a fair trade to me. That fossil actually helped pioneer the concept of extinction and got paleontologists buzzing for centuries. Since then, mosasaur fossils have popped up all over the world, like ancient scaly celebrities leaving their mark. From the Mississippi backwoods to the deserts of Morocco, from New Jersey to Belgium, scientists have uncovered everything from teeth to full skulls, sometimes even misplacing them in museum drawers for centuries. So what exactly were these terrifying titans of the deep? Well, let's just say, if ancient oceans had a most likely to eat everything in sight award, the mosasaur would win it. Picture a gigantic scaly torpedo with a mouth full of about 60 razor-sharp teeth, including some growing on the roof of its mouth like dental overkill. It had a long, muscular tail for propulsion and 4 paddle-like limbs that worked like turbocharged oars, letting it cruise through warm, shallow seas like a reptilian speedboat. Scientists believe they were close relatives of modern monitor lizards and snakes, which honestly just makes both of those animals way more terrifying. Some mosasaurs even might have had adaptations for sensing vibrations in the water, allowing them to detect movement from a distance, similar to how sharks use electroreception today. Their eyes were well developed too, giving them sharp vision in the dim ocean depths, a key advantage when hunting fast or elusive prey. But what really makes mosasaurs the stuff of prehistoric nightmares is their attitude. They were apex predators, and they knew it. Those sea monsters weren't picky eaters. Fish, turtles, birds, sharks, other mosasaurs. Basically anything that moved was dinner. Fossilized mosasaur stomach contents prove they practiced family dinner in the most metal way possible. If they were around today, your beach day would be a lot more exciting. Probably shorter. These guys were so intense, they dominated the whole world. It's safe to say, mosasaurs were the undisputed rulers of the late Cretaceous oceans. And like today's orcas or great white sharks, they probably used ambush tactics, sneaking up on prey from below before striking with explosive force. Bite marks found on the fossilized bones of turtles and even other mosasaurs suggest intense underwater battles worthy of a blockbuster movie. But how did one end up in Mississippi of all places? Well, rewind the clock about 80 million years and you'll find part of North America underwater. A vast shallow sea known as the Western Interior Seaway split the continent in two, running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. It was warm, teeming with life, and yes, crawling with sea monsters. This prehistoric seaway was a watery wonderland. Imagine long-necked plesiosaurs gliding through the water, birds with teeth diving for fish, and oysters the size of car tires clinging to reef-like structures. Even giant fish like this weird guy over here called it home. This ancient inland sea stretched over 600 miles wide in some places, but it was no more than a few hundred feet deep, making it ideal territory for predators like mesosaurs to thrive. The shallow depth also meant that their prey had few places to hide, turning the seaway into a prehistoric buffet. But the Western Interior Seaway wasn't a permanent fixture. As the Rocky Mountains rose, the seaway slowly disappeared. Over millions of years, it transformed from a shallow ocean to swamps and then to dry land. Today, what was once an ocean is now the Midwest, complete with cornfields, cows, and the occasion mosasaur vertebra hiding in the dirt. Now, this wasn't exactly the end of the mosasaurs. Sadly, even these monsters couldn't outswim extinction. Those massive sea beasts met their watery grave around 66 million years ago, when Earth got an unwelcome visitor, a 10-mile-wide asteroid. When that space rock slammed into what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, it unleashed destruction on a planetary scale. The impact triggered massive tsunamis, set forests ablaze, and shot so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked out for months, maybe even years. This impact winter plunged Earth into a deep freeze. With sunlight gone, plants couldn't photosynthesize, and the food chain collapsed like a house of cards. On land, plant eaters starved, and predators like T-Rex soon followed. About 75% of all species on Earth disappeared. But don't think the oceans were a safe retreat. The seas were hit just as hard, if not worse. First came the mega tsunami that devastated marine life along coastlines. Then, the real villain arrived. You see, without sunlight, phytoplankton, those tiny microscopic plants that serve as the foundation of the marine food web, perish. With them went zooplankton, small fish and filter feeders. And when the buffet dried up, the big predators like the mosasaurs went hungry. No food, no future. With plunging temperatures and ocean acidification, even the ocean's top predators couldn't survive. Mosasaurs, along with plesiosaurs and ammonites, were wiped out in the blink of a geological eye. So ended the reign of sea monsters. The good news is that you can now swim at peace knowing that no sea dragon will ever come at you. I mean, it's a bummer that they went extinct, but let's be honest. Beach days are way more relaxing without 56-foot lizards crashing the party.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.